Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome to Morning Glory. It's 2 minutes past 6. I'm Mike Graham, and we are here for the duration, the next 4 hours, absolutely glorious hours of what can only be described as the most exciting breakfast show that anybody has ever seen. Rafe Heidelmann-Koo is here with us. We're going to be running through all the stories on the front pages this morning. There's quite a lot of them. The big story today, of course, is going to be dominated very much by Axel Rudikabana. He is, of course, the Southport killer. He will be sentenced later on today, around about 11 o'clock. Not in the time of our show, but during Julie Hartley-Brewer's show. We'll find out whether or not life will actually mean life. There's been some suggestion that because he committed his crime when he was only 17 years of age, he may well be somehow sentenced as a youth, which would mean that he wouldn't get a life sentence, but we'll find out all about that. We'll be talking to various legal experts. We're getting Rafe on that, of course, as well. That story is still reverberating around the House of Commons. Yesterday, Kemi Badenoch got up in the Prime Minister's questions and said that she was not going to ask any questions about the Southport killings and the way that they were dealt with by Keir Starmer and Downing Street because she was going to wait until the sentencing. Nigel Farage has been very critical of her, saying not one question about the biggest story, not only of the week, but really of the year so far. Nigel Farage also asking for an apology from Angela Rayner when she said back in the summer, anyone who says that this is a terrorist attack by Rudikabana is in fact spreading fake news and is a conspiracy theorist, and that turns out, of course, to be completely and utterly wrong. Speaking of immigrants, front page of the Daily Telegraph, 1 in 12 people living in London is now an illegal migrant, which by my reckoning means there's about 100,000 illegal migrants running around the capital city. New research adds to fears over borders and increased pressure on public services. All the things that we've been saying for a very, very long time. Front page of The Sun, a tragic story. Only yesterday we had Keir Starmer talking about the need to limit the sale of knives online via Amazon and various other retail sellers. We've got a 12-year-old boy called Leo walking home from school in Birmingham. Leo Ross is his name, described as funny and sweet, attacked just minutes from his front door, stabbed to death. Once again, a terrible indictment of law and order in this country. We're going to talk about Rachel Reeves this morning as well. She's on a collision course with other members of her cabinet. We mentioned this yesterday over net zero. We've got Donald Trump, of course, threatening Putin and telling him to stop this ridiculous war. We can either do it the hard way or we can do it the easy way. This, ladies and gentlemen, is on day 2 of his presidential reign over in the United States of America. And also, the other Russian story doing the rounds on front page of the Daily Mail, nuclear sub wards off Putin's spy ship. Apparently there's a Russian spy ship in the English Channel, according to the Defence Secretary who got up in Parliament yesterday, John Healey. We see you, we know what you're doing. Well, you might as well say the same about Parliament. That's what we're doing here at Talk. We see you, we know what you're doing. Don't try and pull the wool over our eyes. We're not that stupid. We dealt with the Lord yesterday. Today, who knows what we're going to be dealing with? 0344 499 1000 is the number. It's 5 minutes past 6. This is Morning Glory. And so, a very good morning to you. We seem to have passed the middle of the week and we're hurtling headlong towards the end of January, which seems extraordinary to me. There's all kinds of stuff to catch up on from what we did yesterday. We had a very rambunctious, you might say, debate yesterday about the meaning of the law when it comes to contempt of court, what you can say, what you can't say. We were able to digest properly what Sir Keir Starmer had said on Tuesday, which was all about his excuses for not releasing any information information whatsoever. Rafe Heidelmann-Q is here, a scholar of many things. And I don't know about you, Rafe, but I mean, I basically managed to get it from Michael Mansfield, a very well-renowned barrister, a man who's been involved in a lot of very high-profile cases over the years. I managed to get from him that Keir Starmer actually could have said an awful lot more legally without in any way jeopardising the court case, and that has been my argument all along. Let's have a look.
Obviously, you can see in this case why there was a problem, because they find Al-Qaeda bomb-making guidance and so on, a book about that. They find ricin. It looks pretty much as though it might be, but it looks, and now, of course, looking back, they're able to say in the context that it was this individual. But that doesn't mean to say he hasn't got a terror-related, because if you possess items that might be of use to a terrorist, then you're guilty of a terrorist-related offence.
Right.
Now, I think Keir was perfectly entitled at the time, if he wanted to say it's potentially related to terrorism, right, but I can't give you the details.
Is exactly right, which has been my sort of stated case all along, because for me, Keir Starmer's hiding behind the legal framework of the word terrorism, which he didn't need to do.
You're precisely right. And this is also what Jonathan Hall, KC,
yes,
who's the independent reviewer of terrorist legislation, has said the same thing. Yeah. He said this information should have been revealed to the public. Yeah. It undermines confidence of the public in these things. And it, of course, leads to people speculating and becoming suspicious about whether or not there was...
And it creates a lack of trust, doesn't it?
It completes a huge lack of trust here. And, you know, the simple thing is, this chap was, you know, found under the charge under the Terrorism Act originally. Right. That should have been made public. Merseyside police, who were criticised, have said, we wanted to come forward with this, but the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, of which Keir Starmer was once head, suppressed this. And what I found really interesting was on the day that he pled guilty, Axel Rudogobana, the BBC came out and the BBC said, we've never experienced such difficulty trying to get information from public bodies about this. Right. There was clearly an attempt to try to suppress protests by preventing this information from coming out.
By suppressing facts and I think suppressing news. You can't do that.
And I think the Southport case should open discussions on whether we should do away with the Contempt of Court Act 1981 section that says you can't discuss these things for fear of prejudicing the trial.
Absolutely.
Because you don't find this elsewhere in the world.
No,
the Americans don't have this. In fact, in America, it's seen as the media holding the courts and the justice system to account.
Absolutely right.
By having full transparency, you'll get wall-to-wall coverage of a trial. You never have trials being struck down for being mistrials in America because of this. In fact, it adds to it. You know, the juries are just told, don't consult the media on all of this. And I think we surely should have more transparency here, because yes, justice for the perpetrator or the accused is one thing, but public faith and public trust must surely be paramount.
Exactly right.
It's been undermined so much.
And I imagine you will feel the same way as I do about this. I feel very, very uncomfortable with the authorities, shall we say, telling us that we can't say something, we can't do something, we can't ask questions about things. You know, trust us, leave it to us. I spoke to John Rentoul and Dan Hodges yesterday, both of whom I accused of having gone over to the other side. I said, you guys are journalists. Why on earth would you accept the word of the authorities? Why would you believe the Prime Minister and his government or the CPS? Our job as journalists is to question everything and to ask to make sure that they're doing their jobs properly. And so the idea that we are sort of slowly sleepwalking into this situation where we're being warned off every single legal case that you can't say anything at all because you will prejudice the jury or you will prejudice the trial. It's absolute nonsense in my view.
It is absolute nonsense. And you know, the funny thing is when pre-trials, for example, in America are always public knowledge. Yeah. In this country, you can't publicise anything about a pre-trial till after the main trial has concluded. Yeah. Whereas in America, because of First Amendment rights, any attempt not to make this public becomes a story in and of itself.
I worked there for 10 years as a journalist, and I was absolutely staggered and amazed at the amount of information that you could actually gain from just ringing people up. When I was there in the midst of all of the insider trading craziness in the 80s, right, and all the arrests of mafia bosses and all the rest of it, and I could ring up the Southern District Court in Manhattan and speak to the US Attorney. He would tell us what he was up to, tell us who he was targeting. I could ring up the FBI in Miami and find out who they were putting under surveillance because of a takeover bid which looked as if it might be a bit dodgy. And it's a much healthier democracy for that.
Well, even during the trial, in the UK, all you get is a brief summary by a journalist standing outside the court will summarise. In America, you'll have proper discussion, you'll have experts on there, you'll get opinion pieces being discussed. We need to seriously... And that, of course, is very good in giving the public faith that they know what's going on, nothing's being hidden from them, whereas we here can now see the dangers of all of this. And I'm afraid you're quite right about the people on the press going over to the other side, because yesterday's newspaper headlines about the Amazon killer is complete deflection. It seems as if, you know, you are the fourth estate. Your job is to hold to account our politicians, and yet you're buying in to their attempts at deflecting the story entirely.
Exactly right. And as we can see from the front page of the Mail and the Sun this morning, a terrible tragedy once again. The knife crime problem in Britain continues. A little boy, 12 years of age, stabbed to death walking home from school. Yet another victim of what can only be described as a tidal wave of knife crime now. And I don't wish to be in any way flippant, but I wonder whether Keir Starmer will be as interested in finding out where this particular knife came from. But what I said yesterday is that you can stop knives being sold as long as you want on the internet and having them delivered to your home. People will still take a knife out of a kitchen drawer and stab you with it.
That's precisely
the point.
This is why it's such a ridiculous deflection. Firstly, knives don't kill people. People kill people.
Yes.
And the idea that any teenager doesn't have access to their mother's carving knife or whatever they have for their Sunday roast or whatever. I mean, it's a complete nonsense. It's a huge distraction. Yes, there is a huge issue with knives in this country. I remember being in Great Yarmouth and seeing a shop front full of these machetes openly being advertised for sale. But, you know, if somebody has murderous intent, they are going to commit that, however difficult it is to get hold of a weapon.
Absolutely.
And there's another issue here also I just want to quickly say here, you know, something which no one in the media has discussed. You know, asylum seekers and immigrants who come from troubled backgrounds and war-torn places are far more prone to violence and criminality. And we are not discussing this in this country. The fact that this person, Axel Rudikabana, was born in Wales is irrelevant. Because if you look at the Nottingham murders, if you look at the Sir David Amess's assassination, if you look at the Manchester Arena bombing, you look at this case, these were all the children of asylum seekers. And all the evidence shows that there's a more predisposition to mental health issues and to criminality and to violence. And we are importing to this country a vast number of, a population of ticking time bombs. And it includes all of the illegals coming over on the channel crossings, hundreds of thousands of fit young men of fighting age, many of whom have witnessed, some of them have participated in horrific incidents in their own countries. They're coming here, they're poorly adjusted, they're psychologically disturbed, they will never assimilate into our society, and these are ticking time bombs.
We had this problem, did we not, after the Balkans War as well, where we had an awful lot of people coming to this country from Serbia, from Bosnia. Many of them are still here, and not all of them obviously were you know, damaged, but many of them were. And there was a huge crime wave at one point, and a murderous crime wave committed of crimes committed by people who had seen some horrible things and done some horrible things in a war zone. You know, and it's not surprising. I like you, have read the same studies in which they say things like oftentimes the second generation who maybe are born in this country actually develop a hatred of the country they're in because they develop a fascination for the country their parents left. Well, and they want to go back there and they want to revisit the traumas.
Well, and we know Rudikabana was obsessed by the Rwandan genocide that his family had fled. Also, he now is looking, apparently some of the stuff he was looking on the internet was to deal with slavery and racism and all of that sort of woke ideology about Britain being somehow evil or white people being oppressors and so forth. There's a lot to be said here for having a proper discussion about why we are importing people, many of whom will never be adjusted, who have psychological issues. You know, and that alone, for example, over 1,000 British-born people went off to fight for ISIS, have come back here being psychologically disturbed but brutally hardened by the experiences that they've had overseas.
Yes, it's extraordinary. Yeah, let's just go back to Rudikabana for a moment before that moves us very nicely onto the Telegraph's front page, which says 1 in 12 Londoners is now an illegal migrant. But just one final one on Rudikabana, the Sun, on page 5. Life must mean life. Killer must never be free. This is the parent of one of the Southport stabbing victims saying that Axel Rudikabana should rot in jail after his sentence this morning around about 11 o'clock, which we'll bring to you, of course, live. And you know, what we don't know, and I suspect they wouldn't be stupid enough to do this, but what we don't know is whether some lawyer will get up and say he should be sentenced as a juvenile because he committed his crime when he was under 18.
Well, he was 13 days shy, 2 weeks shy of turning 18. And that automatically means that he won't get a full life tariff, which means he won't die in prison. We almost know that's going to be the case. He could be there for 40 years, perhaps, but he won't die in prison. And, you know, I'm quite worried about the public's reaction if this person doesn't get.
So you're saying it's definitely the case that he won't get a full life term?
From what I've read and understand, he will not get a full life term, but he may be decades, but he won't die because it was 2 weeks short. And my view is we need to review this as well.
Yes.
I think judges should be given discretion. If you are 17,
Absolutely.
you know, people are aged at different points. If you're 17 years of age, the judge should have the discretion for that entire year as to whether to try you as an adult or not. And I think in this case, given that we know about his background, what's happened to him, given the fact that he refused to stand up in court, shows no remorse,
made no plea initially in October.
Yeah, and we know that this guilty plea was done in order to reduce his sentence, because he knew, obviously, it was bound to result in his conviction.
Right. And maybe it was also done, and forgive me for being called a conspiracy theorist, if that's what the Prime Minister would like to call me, perhaps it was also done as a deal so that the court case didn't take place, there was no trial, we didn't hear all the evidence.
Well, you may very well comment on that question. You know, people have wondered about this. You know, firstly, scheduling it on the same day as the inauguration, suppress media coverage, and then having this very convenient guilty plea, which avoids all of the details coming out. Now, I had hoped that the media would then pick it up, but you haven't seen Newsnight or Panorama doing anything not close to a proper investigation on all of this, so who knows, you may well be right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm watching Sky briefly yesterday afternoon for my sins. I don't know why I put it on, but occasionally I just do it to punish myself, and there's a masochistic, bizarre kind of nature that I've got. And do you know what they were discussing? They were discussing the pardons that were handed out in American sort of political history, going all the way back to sort of the last century. And you're kind of going, is that the best you can do? You know, is that what you think news is, that people care about in this country? And also how American public polls were going in terms of how much people want Trump to do and whether they actually agree with him about deporting mass numbers of immigrants.
But, you know, this is a hugely important... At what point are the British public going to wake up to this, and the British media going to wake up to this, you know? After the Manchester Arena bombing, we thought we might get action. Nothing was done. After this, you would hope, after all the protests and outrage, you would have thought this would have been a moment for change. But no, everything is just reverting back to the way that it was.
It's another review.
Everything's been forgotten about, and we're going to go just through this cycle again and again. We can't do this. This has been a huge disgrace. And the fact that you had a huge swathe of the British population slandered as being far-right and conspiracy theorists, when clearly they were proved right, and they were just outraged at the murder of innocents by the offspring of an asylum seeker. You know, the press have failed in their duty.
And they won't address the problem, which you've just very well explained and articulated, that, you know, 5 of the biggest mass terror events, you know, in recent history have been committed by children of asylum seekers. I mean, you know, that's the big elephant in the room, ladies and gentlemen. Coming up, we'll talk about the Telegraph story. 1 in 12 people in London is now an illegal migrant. Plus, much more besides this talk.
breaking news for you coming out of Liverpool Crown Court. Axel Rudo Cubana has pleaded guilty to murdering 3 young girls in the knife attack at the Taylor Swift-themed dance class.
The tragedy of the Southport killing must be a line in the sand for Britain. There has been a failure here, and I don't intend to let any institution of the state deflect from their failures, and I acknowledge that readily here. And so if the law needs to change to recognise this new and dangerous threat, then we will change it, and quickly.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 23 minutes past 6. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through, of course, until 10. Ray Manku is here with us as well. We're going through the papers. Just a bit of breaking news for you before we carry on. This is an incident from last night that we've just learned about. Armed police have swarmed Plymouth after a person was stabbed in the street. And police continue to search for the suspected attacker. An entire region of West Hoe in Plymouth has been cordoned off, basically. Police and emergency services rushed to the scene just before 9 p.m. last night after a person was found seriously injured in the street. A lot of eyewitnesses talking about a large amount of blood on the street, it would seem. As far as we understand it, the police are still searching for the suspected attacker. We'll bring you up to date on that. No idea really what it is, no idea if it's terror related, as we would say nowadays, but we will keep you abreast of all of that as it happens. Rafe, let's talk about the Daily Telegraph story, because 1 in 12 people in London is now an illegal migrant. It's a fascinating story, right? This is a study commissioned by Thames Water, which has been obtained by the Telegraph under Freedom of Information style laws.
Yeah, that's the first thing to say, how ludicrous and outrageous it is that this information isn't being supplied to us by the Home Office.
No.
It's being supplied by Thames Water. And actually, we at the New Culture Forum have said for a while, if you want a proper, accurate assessment of the population of this country, go to utilities companies.
That's a very good point, actually.
Don't look at the government sources, unfortunately. And we've had to turn to a water company to find out that 1 in 12 London people are illegal migrants. That's as many as perhaps 600,000 people. And, of course, that places huge demands on our public services, on housing, on A&E, for example. The implications of all that, because nobody in government is planning for that amount of people.
No. Well,
right? So this isn't.
Mehmet, sorry to interrupt you. The chairman of think tank Migration Watch, who comes onto this show on a regular basis, says a population underestimate on this scale has colossal implications for local authority planning, utilities, housing. Will all come under severe pressure. I mean, I've been saying this, and you probably have as well, for a good many years, that, there's a reason why it looks a lot more crowded in London than it used to, because it is. There's a reason why you can't get a doctor's appointment, because there's more people here. There's a reason why you can't get to see your GP, or you can't get an NHS appointment. The waiting list is getting longer. There's a reason why there's traffic on the streets and you can't get on a train and the underground's always busy. Because there's more people here. Exactly.
Plus, on top of that, you've also had reports that the NHS are actually prioritising undocumented migrants over the British population, which is another outrage, of course. And now we can see the scale of the problem. If they're prioritising 600,000 people in this country, in London, over the population, why people aren't getting the service from the NHS that they should be getting? And people know for full well, you order something on a food delivery app, you order an Uber, and the person on the photograph of the person on the phone is not the same as the person who's delivering your food items.
No, of course.
Because this is the underground economy. And as a French politician said many years ago, and I've said for years now, it's not rocket science. If you want to stop illegal migration, do what the French do and get tough on the black market economy. Because that's why people are overstaying their visas. That's why they're coming here. They can go to the curry houses, they can do the delivery company apps and so forth. cut down on clamp down on the employers, and clamp down on the rogue landlords who are allowing 10 people to live in one room in a house.
And many of these people, as the report says, are not necessarily those who have come on the small boats. They're people who have come here legally, but then just overstayed. For example, I mean, you mentioned the guy in Nottingham, the Nottingham killer. He was, of course, originally coming to this country as a student, and then he just never left. And so he came to study for 2 or 3 years, never went home. And there doesn't seem to be any checks or balances on how many people do actually leave the country. You know, when they talk about net migration figures, they don't really know who's leaving the country and who's staying. Yeah, it's still remarkable to me that some countries, you know, log everybody when they leave the country. We don't do that. I don't know why we don't have that system in place in this country. And yeah, you're quite right. And of course, the thing is that the more immigration you get to this country, people keep saying, on people who are pro-immigration say, oh, but these are people coming on visas, don't worry. Yeah, that's fine. It doesn't really change the figures that much because they're going to leave. Well, actually, we know they overstay their visas. So the argument that actually student visas isn't really a big dent on the nation because they do go away, a large number don't leave. Yes, and isn't it funny how those people who are very pro-migration and pro kind of, you know, globalist would always make these excuses as though, you know, you're somehow in the wrong because they're so naive, these people. You would want to sell them, you know, some swampland in Florida and go, you know, here's a million square feet for you to go and live in Florida, and they'd pay you and happily move there, because these people seem to believe everything that they're told. And again, it comes back to questioning the government, questioning the Home Office, questioning public figures who tell you this stuff, which is actually untrue. I mean, migrant crossings, we've got a story in the Mail today. Crossings in the Channel have passed 1,000 already, and we're only 3 weeks into 2025. Yeah, well, you know, you say some people are naive, that's true, but I've got a good feeling that a lot of people who are pro-migration don't really care about migrants, they hate Britain. This is what Peter Hitchens has said as well, you know, when they were all in favour, when he was on the left, they were in favour of mass migration, not because of the people coming over here, but because of the impact it would have on this country, such as the visceral hatred many people on the left have for this country. But yes, the evidence here again, you know, if Keir Starmer cancelled the Rwanda scheme, it was inevitable that you were going to attract more people. You know, Rishi Sunak was proved right when he said people are going to be queuing up to cross the channel once they know that Rwanda is off the table. I never thought you needed to do Rwanda. I thought you could use a British overseas territory. But the point is, now that after all the struggle to get it into place, what was the harm of just keeping it there as a deterrent? And now, of course, I think Starmer's got egg on his face because he's going to come up against just the same problems that Sunak did, but he's even less equipped. And that's saying something, to be less equipped than Sunak in tackling the issue. And looking at Donald Trump, and we'll talk about him in more detail a little bit later on, you know, people were saying to me just this week, having already had him get stuck into this mass deportation program, people are actually now deporting themselves. There is now evidence that people are going back across the border into Mexico because they don't want to be imprisoned, they don't want to be deported in a way that they can't control, so they'd rather just not bother. So immediately you've got a deterrent. Look what happens. People start going back to where they came from. Yeah, just as we saw here with people leaving this country to go to Ireland after the Rwanda bill passed for that very same reason. Exactly. These things do work as deterrents. You may never actually have to do much with it, but you know, the deterrent is there. But I think and hope, you know, that the great reset, if I can use it, of Donald Trump in America, you know, embarking upon the biggest program of mass deportations in American history, will actually move the Overton window in this country, because we are now the outlier. Europe is actually marked far closer to Trump's America when it comes to this. You've got the Swedes, you know, talking about paying people to go back where they came from, not just asylum seekers. You've got the Germans shutting their borders. The Germans shutting their borders. The Poles have been allowed not to take any refugees in. The Swedes even want naturalised citizens to be able to return home. We are the outlier here. The Italians are also stopping them coming. We're the outlier, and I think it's only going to be a matter of time before the Overton window moves and we can discuss properly having a real programme of mass deportations. Absolutely. We're going to talk about that coming up next with our guest Kevin Tripp, but also I'm going to leave you with this thought before we move into some other stories about cabinet wars that are going on between Rachel Reeves and Ed Miliband and all sorts of people. It might come as a surprise to some couples, it says here in the Daily Mail, but the secret to a satisfying life could be to get married. Now, I don't know whether you are married, I don't know whether you have a view on it, but I just want you to take that in and think about it. According to researchers, basically, people who are married and in committed relationships have higher life satisfaction on average than those who are single. I'm just going to say one thing. I just think they've given up. And so, in fact, it's not so much that they are happier, they just think they're happier because they can't be bothered doing anything else. But we'll come back to that a little bit later on. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Dale Vince is coming on a bit later on. We can ask him about being happily married. He's just paid £40 million to get divorced. He's handed it to his ex-wife. How much money has he actually got? This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 6:34. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. Rafe Hardeman-Q is here with us as well. We're just going to take a quick trip over to Los Angeles to talk to Kevin Tripp, a news reporter at KABC Radio, about the latest on Donald Trump. Let me just give you a couple of quick messages, though, first. Bill from Kent says, so each of these little girls are not even worth a third of a life because of technicalities in the law. In America, he would face 3 life sentences. Time to get back to common sense. And Rose in Exeter says, morning, Mike, reference the latest stabbing. I think that one of the problems is that children are not taught consequences of their actions today. Rose, I think you're absolutely right. That's on the news that there's been another terrible fatal stabbing of a young individual, a 12-year-old on his way home from school, yards from his house, stabbed to death, and will never be seen again on our streets. Absolutely dreadful. Donald Trump is getting back to his old ways. It seems as though now there's always an overnight tweet that we report. Yesterday we reported on the tweet he put out about the bishop who was a bit woke and had said something that he didn't like. He told her that she should apologise and she should be fired from her job. Last night, he says, I'm not looking to hurt Russia. I love the Russian people and always have had a very good relationship with President Putin. But he says, let's get this war, which would never have started if I were president, over with. We can do it the easy way or the hard way, and the easy way is always better. He's basically saying, stop this ridiculous war. It's time to make a deal. Kevin, very good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Mike.
Thanks very much for joining us. He's getting busy, isn't he, the new president? I mean, he's only been in a couple of days, and he's busy solving the border problems. He's busy solving the problems in the Middle East. He's now telling Vladimir Putin to make a deal to end the war.
Yeah, and this will be an interesting saga because, of course, Donald Trump in his first term had a very cozy relationship with Vladimir Putin. Some within his own party thought it was too cozy. He was too conciliatory toward the Russian dictator, president, whatever you want to call him. Now Trump is sounding like he's going to be a little tougher, which will be welcomed within his own party as well as within the Democrats. He's saying that he wants Vladimir Putin to make a deal with Volodymyr Zelensky. We're not sure what that deal would entail, but Trump is saying that if he doesn't reach a deal of some kind, that there will be tariffs and taxes and other sanctions on Russia. Of course, Russia cannot afford more sanctions or tariffs or anything like that. Its economy is in shambles. So the question is, though, is this bluster by Donald Trump, which we've seen before, or is there actually going to be some sort of negotiated settlement to the war? The Russians have signaled they're open to that. Even the Ukrainians have signaled that they're open to some sort of a deal. And after 3 years, I think it seems like it's probably likely, but the devil's in the details, Mike.
Well, that's true. I mean, certainly there's a body of opinion that says, how much longer do we allow this war to continue? How much more funding should the West give to Ukraine and to Volodymyr Zelensky? Our Prime Minister Keir Starmer was only in Ukraine last week, promising another $4.5 billion of aid to Ukraine, and saying we must, sort of carry on until the very end. But of course, as many people say, all wars end in some kind of negotiation settlement. And so you might as well end it sooner rather than later. And the only people who seem to be very, very excited about keeping the war going are politicians. I think most people, certainly in this country, and I believe quite a lot of people in America as well, don't want to see an awful lot of money being fed once again for another 12 months into what seems to be an endless conflict.
There's two schools of thought. One is that we can't keep spending hundreds of billions of dollars on this war. The other school of thought, even among members of his own party, like Senator Lindsey Graham, who's more hawkish, is that the billions of dollars keeping Russian aggression at bay is well spent, especially when it does not involve U.S. troops losing their lives on the ground. I should note, though, and I think this is one thing that has not been discussed enough, Trump met with Volodymyr Zelensky in France with the French President Macron. And I wonder, does Trump see Zelensky as youthful and strong and vigorous, attributes Trump likes to be next to? And does he see Putin as weak and old and declining? Trump doesn't want to be associated with losers.
No.
Does Trump now see Putin as the loser in this equation?
Well, it's an interesting thought. We shall ponder that one as we see what the reaction is from Russia. Kevin, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Kevin Tripp, news reporter there at KABC Radio in Los Angeles. It's a fascinating one, this, Rafe, isn't it? Because there's certainly a school of thought from our perspective here at Talk, and from the people that listen and watch us, who say, what is the point of this continued funding of the Ukraine war? And the same goes for Trump. I think Trump's view in America is that, we don't want to continue just to keep funding a war where people die. Trump doesn't like wars. He sees them as bad business, doesn't he?
This is a never-ending war, and it's not going to end in anything other than sort of a World War I type sort of stalemate.
Right.
Look, I was somebody from the beginning who said if the West got its act together at the beginning, if there was a concerted effort to push back Putin back when the war first started, Ukraine would either have won now or be in a far better position for negotiating.
Yes.
So I've always been in favour of strong-arm tactics against Putin, who I think is an evil dictator, and those people on the right who are Putin apologists. Well, the fact that he's sailing his ships trying to cut our cables
I was going to say,
over here shows you what he's really like. This is an aggressor who needs to be dealt with. The Poles, who are the most anti-woke people in the world, they understand the threat of Putin. So just because he's anti-woke doesn't mean we should be supporting him in any sort of way. But the point, we've come to a time now where actually there does need to be a bit of realpolitik. We need to understand the reality, and that is that you're going to have some sort of compromise, because there's no way of pushing the Russians back.
Well, it's not going anywhere, is it?
And I don't know, and Trump says, oh, well, we're going to have to put up more tariffs and more sanctions. Well, I'm sorry, I don't know what else you can probably do right now, given there is so much economic pressure. I mean, Russia's been pushed into China's
well, this is it, and they make plenty of money from China selling them gas, don't they? So it's not as if the sanctions have completely destroyed their economy. I don't think that's quite right, what Kevin Tripp said.
Well, and India's now buying up all this cheap gas
and everything
oil
they do, they're now doing. I mean, I suppose if you were to try and put pressure on them, you'd try and put pressure on the UAE, where they do an awful lot of business as well. UAE is full of Russian businessmen and people who used to live here in London, oligarchs and all the rest of it. And there's an awful lot of trade going backwards and forwards through the Middle East, let's put it that way. But let's have a look at what Defence Secretary John Healey said. You mentioned the Russian spy ship, which is in the Channel, trying to show a show of force, basically, and keep an eye on what we are actually up to. Here's what John Healey had to say.
A foreign vessel, Yenta, is currently in the North Sea, having passed through British waters. Let me be clear. This is a Russian spy ship used for gathering intelligence and mapping the UK's critical underwater infrastructure. For the last 2 days, the Royal Navy has deployed HMS Somerset and HMS Tyne to monitor the vessel every minute through our waters. And I changed the Royal Navy's rules of engagement so that our warships can get closer and better track the Yantar. And I also want President Putin to hear this message. We see you, we know what you're doing, and we will not shy away from robust action to protect this country.
And that's probably about the best statement I've seen from this government about anything, actually. You know, proper action, proper defence of the realm, proper, you know, hardline tactics with a foreign invader. Simple.
Yeah, very encouraging to see that, because, of course, it's not just with military vessels that this is happening.
Yeah.
You know, there are a lot of disguised merchant ships that are also engaged in this. We've seen a cable cut, and people need to understand what's going on. These cables are the lifeblood of the West, you know. Internet traffic, so much communications, and so much of the economy depends upon these cables. So when these are severed, it's a real threat to the nation. So it's very good to actually see such a firm stance being taken by the government, which is quite right. That's the first duty of any government, to defend. You know, last week I was in Plymouth at the Royal Naval Base Devonport, and I was lucky to set sail on one of the frigates, which is an anti-submarine thing. And it's, you know, I've got all the time and for our boys and girls who sail on the seas, and to have the government giving them their full support is so important.
Yeah, very much so. Couldn't agree more. We've got some pictures just in here from Los Angeles, because a new fire has broken out in a place called the Castaic Lake area of Los Angeles. Experts are apparently warning this could go nuclear. I think we've only just heard, I suppose, in the last few days that they seem to have had the fires somewhat under control, but this would appear to be a new fire. Questions, of course, have been asked already about how these fires have started. It would appear that it's got nothing to do with climate change and everything to do with arsonists and various other bad actors, and just a general lack of water being able to put the fires out.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same old story.
That looks huge, doesn't it? It looks bigger than anything we've seen there before.
Well, and just look at the carbon emissions from these fires has basically pushed back, you know, years worth of California's efforts to try to get towards net zero. People don't talk about that enough.
My God, look at that. That's incredible.
But yeah, there are so many arsonists who take advantage of these moments because they want to see this sort of devastation.
Yeah.
You know, our minds can't comprehend why they would possibly do this. But what can you say?
I know, it is absolutely frightening, it's shocking. And, you know, I'm still talking to friends of mine who live out there who are very glad and they say how fortunate they are that they haven't had their homes destroyed. But so much of if anybody's ever been to that part of the world, when you drive up around Malibu and just north of there, so much of those, you know, sort of seaside, you know, kind of restaurants, bars, they've all just been completely destroyed, burned to the ground.
I've got lots of friends in LA. 3 of them are actually coming over here next week for an event, and one of them said, you know, his current place is fine. His large house has been destroyed, and his previous house has also been destroyed. Yeah,
it really is shocking. Terrible. Coming up, though, we're going to talk about a great many other things, including more battles inside Keir Starmer's cabinet. Rachel Reeves is on a collision course with Ed Miliband over net zero. She wants to say to him that net zero might be important to you, but it's not as important as growth. And we need growth, and so she wants to put a new runway into Heathrow. Some suggestions last night that Keir Starmer's not going to side with Rachel Reeves, which is bad news for her. She's still in Davos, I think, might be coming back today. Also, we'll talk some more about Donald Trump. He's put some diversity staff on leave, and we'll also talk about whether being married makes you happier. This is Talk.
In his opposition to so-called gender-affirming care for children, he is protecting kids who will probably turn out to be gay or lesbian when they grow up.
Yeah.
There are a lot of statistics to support
huge amount of evidence that is often the case. Exactly. A lot of vulnerable children with autism and the like. Yeah, I thought that was particularly strange. But also, trans people apparently living in fear.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. 6:49 is the time. We are here, of course, all the way through until 10 o'clock. We've got a great many things to talk about. The big story coming up later on this morning is the sentencing of Axel Radicabana, the Southport killer. He is probably not going to get an full life term. Rafe Hardermain-Kube was explaining to us earlier that because he was only 17, albeit he was practically 18 when he committed the crimes, he may still be sentenced as a juvenile. We'll bring you that, of course, as it happens. It should be sometime after 11 o'clock this morning on Julie Hartley-Brewer's show. Let's talk a bit about Donald Trump, though, some more, because lots and lots of things going on in the United States of America. He's been incredibly busy in the first sort of 2 days of his new reign, shall we say. Trump 2.0, they're calling it. Page 12 of the Daily Mail. Trump puts all federal diversity staff on paid leave starting now. You know, it's amazing how his ability to just do things is in stark contrast, is it not, to this government here, where every time they talk about anything, there's a review. There has to be a review done first before they can make any decisions.
I mean, this is the most exciting, change of regime that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
He's had 4 years, basically, to prepare for this moment, unlike the first time round when he wasn't prepared, wasn't expecting to win, and you're seeing him hit the ground running. And, if we put 1/10 of this into action in this country, we'll be in a far better place.
Yes.
And I think what's going to happen in America over the course of, just say, the next 2 years is going to be so dramatic in revitalizing the nation that it's going to be like a tsunami coming over the ocean.
Yes.
And it's going to wash over the shores of Europe as well, when people see, actually, the emperor has no clothes. DEI has been one of the most insidious and sinister things to happen. The return of meritocracy to American society.
Yeah.
This is great. So he's putting all of these federal diversity programs, he's abolishing them all.
Yeah.
He's putting the staff who are there on paid leave, on administrative leave. How long that's going to last, I don't know, because these people who didn't do anything in the first place are now going to be doing even less and still getting paid huge amounts of money for it. Let's hope they can stop being paid. But I think it's so important for him to make this stand. And also, it's funnily, the deep state is so powerful in America that the Trump administration know that lots of these DI programs are going to be renamed as other things to try to hide them.
Wow.
And so that they've told people, you have 10 days to inform us if any of these shenanigans are going on, and you'll get no penalties. If we find out after 10 days that this has happened, there are going to be severe repercussions for anybody who didn't whistleblow.
And it's been brought into stark contrast recently because of those fires in Los Angeles, because we've seen what happens in the Los Angeles Fire Department, which seems to be being run by people who were not appointed for their knowledge of how to put out fires.
Well, as Bill Maher said, because one of them is the lesbian, the fire chief is a lesbian, and he said, was this the best person for the job or the best lesbian for the job?
Exactly.
Because there's a big difference in meritocracy.
This is the same woman, I think, who said that if a man is caught in a fire, she was asked whether she could carry a man out of a fire.
That's a different one, but yes.
But they've all got the same name. It's easy to confuse them. And she said, well, if you're a man and you got caught in a fire, then you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. There was no kind of, thought of, actually, this is what my job is, to rescue you.
But it's outrageous to say such a thing. Even for that to come into your mind, it's your fault that you're actually on the top floor of an apartment building that's on fire. But then also to say, Well, actually, what the thing people want when their house is on fire is for someone who looks like them to come and save them.
Right.
You know, that's not the first priority.
It's really not.
Most people have, you know.
I don't care.
Chinese.
Yeah.
I'm really going to have a Chinese
I don't care if
firefighter
somebody with
come
2
in.
heads turns up to carry me out. I'd be more than happy. Thank you very much indeed. Let's talk about Rachel Reeves, because it started yesterday. The story started appearing. She's been in Davos talking ridiculously. I was watching last night some of the coverage of her speech, and she was being interviewed on various news programmes, talking about how, you know, I've drawn a line under the chaos of the last government's fiscal policies. And you're going, hang on a minute, only yesterday we learned that 18 billion practically had been borrowed just in the month of December alone, the most money that's ever been borrowed in a December since COVID, and before that since the last financial crisis of 2009. And the idea that she keeps telling people that she's brought stability back to the economy is a complete and utter nonsense. She's now going to war basically with several members of the cabinet, including Ed Miliband, because she wants growth to be, you know, a more important mission, shall we say, than net zero.
Yeah, well, look, this is the first time I'm going to say bravo Rachel Reeves on this front. You know, Rachel from accounts, you know, even a broken clock is right twice a day. And to basically put prioritising growth over net zero, I think, of course, we can all support that, because, you know, too much of vital investment in this country, vital infrastructure investment, has been hampered and stopped because of carbon emissions. That's hampering us at a time when growth is basically, you know, with flatlining. We've now seen in America, now people may have issues with Trump saying drill, baby, drill, and going after oil and gas, but the point is, America's economy is going gangbusters. We are stagnating, we're going backwards. You know, you just compare the EU economy to America's economy. In 2008, they were level pegging.
No comparison.
Now there's no comparison. And the fact that we're still discussing, can I just say, we're still discussing a third runway at Heathrow for what, 20 years, 25 years? Meanwhile, you know, China has built about 100 airports in the time that we've been discussing.
Absolutely
this very issue.
Also, the problem with the net zero economy and the net zero kind of mission is that basically it's all about subsidies, and it's all about public money being used to stimulate private investment, which it never really does. It just means that you get a load of public money going into companies that get very wealthy and make a fortune, but there's no great benefit to the public. The sign, of course, that you need to look for in the Financial Times is that just how left-wing can they get. They've got a headline today saying Trump stalls $300 billion worth of infrastructure funds as his Biden climate agenda is ditched. They're basically saying there's worries that the federal infrastructure funding is at risk. Well, that's another word for public money. And the reason that Trump is ditching it is because he doesn't want to put public money to the tune of $300 billion into the net zero black hole. Because what's the point? But, you know, they're taking that as a negative, as opposed to what most people will do and say, well, that's a positive. I'm glad he's pulling the funding, because that's not where people want the money to be spent.
This is just like DOGE, the Department for Government Efficiency, right? You want the American dollar to be spent in the most useful and efficient way, and clearly a lot of these schemes are not the most efficient way to be spending this sort of money. But you also have to say, look, Britain and Europe are hampering themselves. If the rest of the world is going gangbusters for growth by actually doing great infrastructure projects and doing things that are perhaps not net zero friendly, we are the one part of the world that's hampering ourselves so much, actually, that we're going to be left in the dust.
Yeah, absolutely right. Speaking of which, in January, some people feel miserable. We were told, actually, on Monday, and this must have been yet another left-wing sort of piece of miserable news, that Monday was Blue Monday. I mean, most people listening to this show were absolutely cock-a-hoop because Donald Trump's inauguration happened, and they were all feeling very, very up an atom. Thank you very much indeed. But the Mail's got a story today saying that January blues are not just for people. Dogs can also feel gloomy at this time of the year as well. So if you're wondering why your dog is not feeling quite as well, it's on page 9 of the Mail. Dark mornings, disrupted routines, owners returning to work after Christmas can leave dogs out of sorts. And this is according to research from Guide Dogs UK. I mean, my dog's getting a bit old and grumpy. Which means that he does a lot of barking now that he didn't used to do when he's feeling like he wants some attention. But I don't think he's suffering from the January blues particularly.
Well, I think there might be something in it because, dark days mean that people aren't going out as early to take their dog for a walk. So they limit the time, they do all of that. So
yes.
I'm not a dog owner, but also I think, dogs are very receptive to how you feel as a human,
oh,
right?
for sure.
And so if you got the blues, it's not surprising that, your dog is going to get the blues too. And I would always, if I had the ability, I would like to be somewhere else during January and February.
Yes. Yes, if you can go somewhere warm and sunny, it's always a good time to do it, isn't it? But, I mean, I've never really suffered, I must admit, from the January blues, because you have some time off at Christmas, and then by that stage, and I mean, this harkens back to the other story about being happily married, you just want to get out of the house. You want to get back to work and leave the kids alone, leave the wife or the husband or whatever it is, and actually get back to doing proper work. And that's what I was quite like doing in January.
Yeah, freedom from family is a great
freedom
incentive.
from family, absolutely right. And one final one, spreadable coffee on toast. Now, this is in Daily Mail as well. I think it's on, I thought I was going to say it was on page 3, but it's not. No, it's on page 5. Forget marmalade, coffee on toast. A Swiss-based business called No Normal Coffee has launched a dark roast paste made from Arabica coffee beans. I don't know whether it's got any caffeine in it, but I suppose you could take that as a hit to keep you awake in the morning.
Yeah, well, what's the point of coffee if there's no caffeine in it? I never got this decaffeinated.
Yeah, decaffeinated coffee, which some people in America drink more than I think we do here. Yeah, what's the point of that? Absolutely no point. I'm not particularly a fan of the taste of coffee, so I don't think I'd want to put it on toast.
Oh, I like decent coffee, but we're not. That's the thing. Are you going to now have these new tubes of macchiato, soy latte tubes to mix in with them? I don't know how far they're going to go.
I know, it is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. I'll tell you what I did notice yesterday at one of my tube stations that I use quite a lot. There used to be a sweet shop there, which also sold newspapers. It's now become a coffee shop because there's these bleeding, sort of gourmet coffee shops opening up everywhere.
Well, we need to
I
defend.
can't be bothered.
We need to defend tea and the drinking of tea. Because
yes.
I think tea's under threat now when these trends are allowed. Bring back Lions Corner houses.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I'm a big fan. According to the Telegraph, says Keith in Hertfordshire, we talked about this, 1 in 12 illegals in London. That's 585,000 people. An absolute disgrace. Keep the Lord's feet to the coals. Yeah, we haven't got any Lords on today, I don't think, have we? Anyway, this is Morning Glory. Back after the news. Thanks, Ray.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is...
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 7. I'm Mike Graham, and we are here for the duration, ladies and gentlemen. The big story this morning, Axel Cabana, the Southport killer, is going to get sentenced this very morning around about 11 a.m. It will happen during Julie Hartley-Brewer's show. We'll be talking about what will happen, what could happen, what may happen, and, of course, in the end, how we will react to it. There's a strong suggestion that because he was only 17 years old when he committed the crime, albeit just 13 days short of his 18th birthday, that he will in fact be sentenced as a juvenile. Now, in my view, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, and certainly whoever is now the head of the CPS, should get involved in this and say that is not going to be acceptable to the British public, that is not going to be acceptable to the people of this nation who have been so appalled, not only at the way that he was completely and utterly savagely murdering young children, young girls who were at a dance class, and relentlessly stabbing people all around him over a 12-minute period of absolute mayhem and horror. We don't treat that as a childlike offence. We don't treat that as a juvenile offence. That should not be treated as anything but an adult offence, and he should be given a full life term, never to be released out into the general public ever again. 0344 499 1000 is the number. We're going to talk to James Price, former government advisor, very shortly about a whole manner of things, including the Ruda Cabana story, the Starmer problems with the free speech of this nation, his complete and utter inability to understand that covering up this particular crime and not revealing some of the things that he could have revealed about the assailant has not also gone down very well with the people of this country. Also, we'll be talking about Russia. Donald Trump wants to end the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia are spying on us in the Channel. But don't worry, we've got a good defence secretary, it turns out, John Healey, who's keeping an eye.
We see you, we know what you're doing, and we will not shy away from robust action to protect this country.
And I tell you what, that's as good of a phraseology that I can think of using for us keeping an eye on this government of ours, which doesn't seem to be firing on all cylinders, it has to be said. 0344 499 1000. One here from Mike. Morning, Mike. You need to get 5 years in prison just for carrying a knife. Send a message or this will never stop. And that's, of course, on the news that yet another terrible, terrible story has happened in the last 24 hours. A young boy by the name of Leo Ross, murdered on his way home from school at the age of 12, stabbed to death just yards away from his front door. When is somebody going to do something about the knife crime epidemic in this country? This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. Also, the big story this morning on the front page of the Daily Telegraph that 1 in 12 people in London is now an illegal migrant. We'll be getting stuck into that story as well. Christina says, Mike, what's going on in Plymouth? Multiple stabbings. Can you guys confirm? Well, we carried this in the first hour of the show. There appears to have been some kind of incident in Plymouth overnight. Armed police swarmed a particular part of the city after a person was stabbed in the street. Cops are continuing to search for the suspected attacker. They rushed to the scene around about 9 p.m. last night. They're believed to be still looking for the assailant, and some terrible, terrible eyewitness stories coming from that part of town. We don't know precisely what's happened, but there are armed police wearing body armour all over the city, and so we'll keep you updated as soon as we have news of that. Alan in Merseyside said, reports are saying that Rachel Reeves isn't bothered about Trump putting tariffs on our country. Another reason, if any, was needed for us to have someone qualified to be Chancellor, not Rachel from accounts. Meanwhile, Donald Trump continues to work at a pace which is quite breathtaking in terms of some of the things he's getting done. James Price is here, though. James, very good morning to you.
Good morning, my friend. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, not at all. Thank you for being here. Let's kick off. I mean, we've obviously got the Ruda Cabana sentence later on this morning. I'm going to say now, I think if he is sentenced as a juvenile, that will be taken very badly by the people of this country. I don't know what the ins and outs of the legalities are here, but you could imagine Sir Keir Starmer mumbling his way through an excuse of why the due process has to be followed and how he can't overrule the law and how, because he was 17 when he committed this crime, he cannot be given a whole life sentence. All of that nonsense should just be stripped away, and he should be sentenced to a full life term, shouldn't he?
No, I think he should be hanged. I think I've got to this point now where we have pure evil in this country, and I don't see why taxpayers should be on the hook for paying for this animal to be allowed to live for much longer. Council, I think that it's very important that we start to call evil what it is. For those who are watching this morning, you've just put the mugshot of this person. I hasten to use the word person up. I think if you stare into the eyes in that mugshot, you're staring into the eyes of pure evil, and we shouldn't countenance it even being allowed to keep on living anymore. I think that is proper justice for the kind of crimes that have happened. But I think the broad point about the sentencing is that we've got ourselves in a real muddle about what the age of being an adult actually is in the UK. In Wales, they reduced the voting age from 18 to 16, but around the same time they raised, and I'm sorry if people are eating their cornflakes, the age at which people could have piercings in their delicate parts raised from 16 to 18. So you can put bits of you can have vote at a younger age, but you can't put bits of metal in yourself at certain ages. There are all kinds of silly rules around what actually constitutes someone being an adult. So I think that this should all get itself cleared and sorted out. But I think whichever way it does, it means that this person should face the maximum possible justice, whether that's capital punishment or, as you say, a whole life order, never to be repeated again.
I mean, Simon in Spain has sent us a message to say that even though the guidelines will suggest that he can't be sentenced to a whole life term, the judge is allowed to sentence each offence to run consecutively, thus meaning he could never get out due to the number of offences. He says, however, as night follows day, I guarantee the judge won't do this, because on a broader sort of landscape, and there'll be a lot of people that agree with you about the capital punishment thing. On a broader landscape, we do seem to have this terrible kind of collection of people who run the judiciary who don't seem to have a clue about how to do it. They don't seem to understand the feelings of the people, and I know they'll talk very grandly about the purity of the law and how you can't start seeking revenge, and the law is not for revenge, and well, sorry, I think it is for revenge actually. If you kill someone, particularly if you kill a child, that is all about revenge. It's not about saying, oh, you've been a very naughty boy, please don't do it again, is it?
No, quite. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, is all well and good. But, I think at some point it's mankind's mission to send the person to his final judgment on this. But you're completely right. Sentencing in this country has gone completely out of whack with the people's priorities and with any actual sense of justice as well. You have, in some cases, I think of the people in one of the rape gangs recently, to use another horrible story we're suffering through, got 3 years for being involved in one of these things, which is only a smidgen longer than someone got for writing mean things about them on Facebook. This is completely out of whack. And I think there's the sentencing council. It's something I didn't really know existed until quite recently. Some sort of quasi arm's length body that some cowardly minister would have vested with loads of power once upon a time go along and say, actually, no, we need to reduce these sentences. This poor young man, maybe it was just Amazon's fault that he could buy the knife, or Tesco's fault that he bought the meal deal, or Nike's fault that he bought the shoes he was wearing, all this kind of complete nonsense. I think that for true
justice... And
he's
been traumatised because his parents come from Rwanda,
Yeah, well, and I think we're still not entirely sure what happened in some of those circumstances. We know that the father at least stopped him from going a week before, but why did he not call the police then? And we've heard that this disgusting animal was referred to Prevent for 3 times. He was found with a knife on him 10 times before. Here's a fun thing. Let's not attack Amazon. Let's say if you're caught with a knife 10 times, you should be put in prison for the rest of your life. Very, very simple.
Exactly right. I mean, I had the misfortune to interview a guy called Lord Carlisle yesterday, former Lib Dem, who now sits in the House of Lords, and was rather pompous about the idea that he was once the reviewer of the Prevent system, and he sat there with a straight face and told me that Prevent does a great job. And I said, well, it doesn't even do... He said, he does what it says on the tin. I said, it literally doesn't. It doesn't prevent these 3 young girls from being killed by this horrible animal, as you call him. It didn't prevent the people on London Bridge being killed by that guy who was supposedly okay again to come on his own to London with his laptop to Fisherman's Hall. Or Fishmonger's Hall, or whatever it's called. You know, absolutely and utterly ridiculous. And so you've got these incompetent morons who think they know better than everybody else how to, you know, rehabilitate prisoners and rehabilitate, you know, dangerous ideologues and extremists and Islamists and fundamentalists, and they think that's all fine. And it bloody well isn't.
You mentioned that horrible attack in London Bridge. One of those attackers was featured on a TV programme called My Next Door Neighbour the Jihadist, wasn't he? So even if Prevent weren't doing good exhaustive research, at least flicking through the TV channels, they would have found this person they were meant to prevent and failed to.
Yeah.
Look, we've got lots of other stories to talk about, but very quickly, I think everybody should look at the case of El Salvador. It was the most dangerous country on earth, the drug capital of the world, murder capital of the world. New guy comes in, and what does he do? He arrests all of the wrong-uns. It was very easy for him because all the gang members had tattoos all over their faces, but he arrested all of the wrongdoers, and what's happened? Poof! It's now the safest country in the Western Hemisphere, much safer than America or Canada, safer than other European countries, and all he had to do was lock up all the criminals. It's not rocket science.
Right, and much safer than London, where it's revealed now in the Daily Telegraph that 1 in 12 people is an illegal migrant. The thing about this story that really shocks me, actually, is that this has not come as a result of a Freedom of Information request from the Home Office. It has not come from the Border Force. It has not come from the Metropolitan Police. It's come from Thames Water.
Yeah.
Right?
Extraordinary, isn't it?
In fact, we just
wonderful.
had Rafe Heidelmann-Kuhn, and he's actually said very cleverly, he said, actually, these are the real population figures. You go to the utility companies, not the Home Office, because they actually know how many people are using their services.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an extraordinary piece of research. It means something pushing, 600,000 people in London alone here illegally. And you know what? It makes perfect sense. If you live in London or in some of the other big cities in general, how difficult it is to get yourself a doctor's appointment, how difficult it is to get yourself a seat on the tube, how difficult it is to start getting places in the shop to buy these things. The queues are bigger. The infrastructure in general is just completely creaking. And now we know why. Now we know why as well. Crime is massively up because, you know, if you're entering a country illegally, you are by definition already a criminal. You're already committing a criminal act, and you shouldn't be here. And we should follow the lead of Donald Trump, and we should round up every single one of these people and deport them. And some people go, oh no, but it's so good for our economy to have this slave class pouring coffee and cutting down crops in the fields. And just listen to yourself if that's the kind of argument you think you're going to make. We need to import a slave
and driving
class
food around on mopeds.
Well, yeah, quite. The sooner we can get drones to deliver Deliveroo and Uber Eats and Just Eat takeaways, that we don't need people pretending to be learner drivers, by the way. You should all notice that. Every single delivery person seems to have a learner's
That's
permit.
because you don't need to have a licence.
Funny that, isn't it?
Yeah, and also it means you don't probably really need to have insurance. I don't know if anybody's ever run into some of these characters, but I mean, they certainly make some pretty unusual manoeuvres on the streets of London, as far as I can see. And it really is extraordinary that, that you know, the government probably doesn't even know this figure, because an awful lot of these people are not actually the small boat brigade. These are people like the Nottingham killer that you might remember, the schizophrenic, who may well be released at some point in the future, who killed those two lovely students and an older man as well in a sort of rampage that went on for a few hours. He was a student who came here on a student visa and who basically never left. And there's millions of them.
No, I think this is extraordinary. I worked in the Department for Education, and there was a big push to have lots of international students. And at some point, you do wonder what the point was. We talk about, it's really good for our soft power. But at no point do we ever try and inculcate any actual British cultural values into lots of these people. Huge numbers of Chinese coming over, and there you have a perfect example, an opportunity to say, hey, look at this picture of what happened in Tiananmen Square in 1989, to actually, you know, convey some of these things. We don't bother. We just take their money to keep crappy, failing universities propped up that bit longer. Nothing seems to work in this country anymore. And if people at home are angry about this, then they should write to their members of parliament. They should get involved in some of the better political parties and force our leaders to start running this country in the interest of the British people, not of every foreign criminal who wants to break in here and go around stabbing people. It's not complicated.
It's really not complicated, is it? And I mean, I was saying this, and it's now going to become one of my mantras, I think, of the year, because over in America, since Donald Trump has started his mass deportation program, people are actually deporting themselves. They've worked out that rather than being deported in a way which they might not like, and rather than be manhandled by the authorities, they're actually voluntarily walking back across the border into Mexico to head back to where they came from, because they'd rather not be treated badly. So it just goes to show you, if you promise people that they will not be successful in trying to break into your country, they'll stop doing it.
Yeah, that's what leadership looks like, right?
Yeah.
You have actual leadership there. And people in America, although they suffered through 4 quite wild years of Trump, when the economy was doing amazingly well, but they were not sure what was going to happen day to day. They thought, well, we'll elect Biden because he's a grown-up, only to have the most incompetent, Alzheimer's-riddled administration imaginable, full of crazy far-left activism that, again, prioritized foreign criminals over American citizens. They've said enough is enough. They've got a strong leader back in again, and this is what happens. Meanwhile, what are MPs debating about at the moment whilst we're suffering through, terrorist stabbings and paedophilic Pakistani rape gangs? One Liberal Democrat MP said it's really important that we have more women footballers on birthday cards. That was something that an MP wanted to debate about yesterday. We are being led by idiots.
Absolutely right. Let's have a look at Donald Trump. We haven't played a clip from him this morning yet. He's already trying now to stop the war in Russia, which I think a lot of people here would support, after Keir Starmer went and promised another $4.5 billion to Vladimir Zelensky last week without telling us where he was finding the money from. This is Donald Trump talking about his enemies.
I went through 4 years of hell by this scum that we had to deal with. I went through 4 years of hell. I spent millions of dollars in legal fees, and I won. But I did it the hard way. It's really hard to say that they shouldn't have to go through it also. It is very hard to say that.
That, of course, takes us to that rather odd story about Biden pardoning his entire family, and this rather curious practice in America where you can be pardoned for something you haven't even done, or at least nobody's found out that you've done it, so that you can't be, you get sort of lifelong immunity. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, I love the Americans. My fiance is American, but it's one of the most bizarre quirks of their system that the commander-in-chief is able to pardon people, probably including himself or herself.
Yes.
That is a really very odd way of looking at the rule of law, the idea that everybody should be under it. The king here can't do that. His Majesty can't do that. Even Keir Starmer can't do that, although I'm sure maybe one day he'll try when his level of incompetence is found out. But all this stuff about, Biden was a grown-up, Biden was wonderful, Trump is the madman. And you just go and see that Biden has managed to disprove all of those people in his final moments by letting off all of his family, letting off Dr. Fauci, who is a sort of the malevolent, evil American version of poor Chris Whitty.
Yes.
They were told that he did wonderful things, but then has been pardoned not back even from the start of COVID, but back from 2014. So what on earth has the man been doing for the last 10 years? It smells distinctly fishy. And yet again, all the leftists in America are being so stupid they're proving Donald Trump right again.
Of course, absolutely right. One final one for you. I don't often mention the Daily Star, but this morning their front page says Battle of the YMCA. And I suppose this is a sort of peak Trump season now, because it turns out there's a couple of original members of the Village People who are not happy about endorsing Donald Trump. And there's one particular guy who used to be the cowboy, Jim Newman, who says there's no way the Village People with a loyal and strong gay following would ever perform at a Trump rally. Well, he's got that wrong, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has got this wrong. I just think I don't understand where they've got this idea from, that Trump is some anti-gay figure. Not only is he the campest man ever to be president of the United States, but in his first acceptance speech back in 2016, he talked about how he would stand up for all LGBTQ Americans, which is quite a woke way of putting it in this day and house. But his Treasury Secretary, their version of Chancellor of the Exchequer, is an openly gay man who has a husband and 2 children. He just also happens to be an incredibly qualified, smart, sound guy. If you're an evil anti-gay Nazi or whatever Trump is, you don't make people like that your Treasury Secretary. You don't have rabbis speaking at your inauguration.
Right.
Certainly don't dance to the YMCA, as you can see him doing there. Yet again, it's another bit of what he would call fake news.
It really is. Absolutely right. Good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. That's, of course, James Price, former government advisor, saying some very strong things about Radhika Kobana. Many of you will agree with him. He says, forget about a full life term. Hanging is what I would like to see, and many of you would say the same thing. Lewis says, I didn't even know Blue Monday was a thing until this year. What a load of rubbish. Glenn from York says, with regards to the nuke subsurfacing near the Russian spy boat, I'm shocked Sir Keir Starlin hasn't released a statement saying, I have not smashed the gangs, but we finally turned the boat back. Loving your show as always. Yeah, well, he didn't really. He waited until it was out of sort of British waters, I think, before they made the announcement. But anyway, apparently we're watching them. We know what they're up to, and we're not going to let them do anything nasty to us. And that's my mantra about this bleeding government. This is Talk. And what will happen as well is that tension will only increase, because the problem with the net zero plan that Ed Miliband has got is that he has admitted it's going to cost us all an absolute fortune. I mean, he said the other day when he was at Select Committee, well, there'll probably never be a time when heat pumps are cheaper than a gas boiler. So why on earth would anybody ever replace the gas boiler, which is perfectly good, with a more expensive version of a heating device, which will also cost more money in the long term, because electricity prices are going up and up and up as a result of this profligate government.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:25. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10, of course. 4 glorious hours of this show from 6 every single weekday morning until 10 o'clock. Julie Hartley-Brewer will be here then. The big story, of course, this morning, Axel Ruda-Cabana, the Southport killer, will be sentenced later on this morning at around about 11 a.m. We'll bring you that, of course, live as we get it right here at Talk, which is, of course, the home of common sense. Let's talk to Harry Miller now, the founder of Fair Cop. Let's get a quick voice note, though, from Simon.
Morning, Mike. Great show as always. Simon in North Wales. Just listening to the show this morning. My blood's boiling. You know, hearing about this beast from Southport who's obviously carried out these horrid crimes. But they should absolutely bring back the death penalty. You know, lethal injection, whatever it might be, instead of you know, putting these people into prisons for 40, 50 years where the taxpayer's got to pick up the bill for someone who's just pure evil.
It's definitely a conversation that we should be having, I think. There's no question about that. Harry, very good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning, Mike. What a terrible, terrible story the Leo Ross story is.
Well, it is, isn't it? I mean, and funnily enough, I haven't seen yet a statement from Downing Street wondering whether the person who stabbed him may have got their knife on Amazon.
Yeah, well, I did a quick research myself this morning whilst I was waiting to come on the show. I typed in machete UK, and whilst I wasn't able to get an actual machete, right, I was able to get any number of knives which would be every bit as good as a machete. No on my age, nothing at all. No. It's as simple as 1, 2, 3. You can buy a lethal weapon and get it through the post with Amazon Prime by tomorrow at 12, and there you are. You're all set out. You're all set up to go out and do a bit of lethal destruction. It's utterly outrageous, Mike, how easy it is to get and to carry a lethal weapon. Now, one of the powers that the police have, it's called the Section 60 power of stop and search. Yeah. Normally, in stop and search, you have to have reasonable suspicion that there's something on the person. But with Section 60, you don't. All you have to do is have a suspicion that because of the demographic, the time, the place, or whatever, the person might be carrying a lethal weapon upon them. Now, we've had this power for quite some time now. The problem is police aren't using it. Right. They're not using it enough. And the reason they're not using it enough, and this will come as quite a surprise to you, Mike, I've no doubt, is that Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary have told the police that they must be more concerned about being accused of racist, than they are about actually finding and removing illegal knives on the street. When your concern is with how you look, when your concern is when you don't want to mar your statistics because you've stop and searched one more black person than a white person, then there's a consequence to that. And the consequence to that is that the police are fearful and that the person with the knife wanders around the streets knowing full well that they are very unlikely to be stopped and searched. Yeah, that's the problem that we have. We need the police to. We don't necessarily need more powers. We need the police to be confident in the powers that they have.
Well, exactly. And I mean, Keir Starmer said the other day, didn't he, in Downing Street, when he was talking about this Southport case, that, you know, we need to be able to now investigate matters, report matters, and indeed arrest people without cultural sensitivities getting in the way. Now, he said that. Why doesn't he say that to the police?
I've no idea. I've absolutely no idea. People are far more concerned about not being called racist or not being called Islamophobic than they are of actually stopping knife crime and preventing black people, black children, from being stabbed to death. Yeah. If we think about,
well, it's not just black children. I mean, little Leo is a white child. There's any number of children being stabbed every single day. Fortunately, a lot of them don't die. And to your point about Amazon and with the ease with which you can get a knife through the post, you don't even have to do that. You can just get a knife from your kitchen drawer, or you can get a knife, you can nick a knife from Tesco's. You know, you don't need to worry about actually getting it through the mail, do you?
No, absolutely not. But the police have got to get over themselves. They've got to stop worrying about DEI concerns. They need to grow a backbone, get over themselves, and do their job. I love the way that Trump has just laid into the whole DEI thing in the United States. It was absolutely brutal. Yeah. And we need that kind of brutality in this country. We need to close down every single DEI office in the country.
Well, he's put them all on leave. He's taken the entire everyone in any government job which is related to DEI. He's put them all on annual leave.
Yeah, absolutely, with a view to sacking him, because he's going to close them down, and that's what we need to do in this country. So, and certainly with the police, we cannot have a police force that are far more concerned about being seen to do a non-racist thing. We've got to get rid of all that. We've got to get rid of all that. We need to take a view that if you are a police officer and you are racist, we kick you out. But the fear of racism should not prevent police officers from going out there and doing their job. And at the moment, it is causing them to go out there and not do their job. Yeah. And the consequence of that is that people are getting stabbed. Knife crime is up by 4%. Within the next 15 years, the number of deaths will have doubled. as a consequence of knife crime, and we need to get a grip. One of the things that we need to do, we need a college of policing that actually teaches police officers how to police. Because at the moment we have a college of policing that teaches police officers how not to police.
Yes.
It teaches police officers how to be woke. It teaches police officers how to fill in forms. What it doesn't do is teach police officers how to go out there and stop crime before it happens and nab criminals by the scruff of the neck when they dare commit a crime. And this is the consequence of having a fearful police force.
Yes, absolutely right. Speaking, let me just draw you away from that for a minute and ask you about Plymouth, because I think we may have some pictures, I don't know if we have yet, coming in from Plymouth. There was some kind of attack last night around about 9 p.m. On Wednesday night. A person was found seriously injured in the street. Some reports say it's a young woman. It's in the West Hoe area of Plymouth. Basically, an awful lot of police cars. I mean, it looks like a very big incident because you've got multiple numbers of police cars. I've seen footage of 12 or 13 police cars, all with blue flashing lights. I've seen pictures of armed police who appear to be wearing body armour, searching in a sort of block of flats looking for a suspect. They still haven't found the suspect, but it looks to me like quite a serious situation. I don't know if you've noticed it online at all.
No, I've not noticed that online. But, you know, if the police are there in force in numbers with the blue lights flashing and there are an armed officer there, they're great. That is the police doing their job. And what we want is more of this, far, far more of this. Less DEI, less being concerned about statistics, and more active policing. Yeah. You know, if you're not a criminal, you've nothing to fear, have you? No. I don't mind if they stop and search me every day of the week because I'm carrying nothing on me.
Right. Well, I was in London. I live in London. I mean, I was on the tube the other day, right? And I was coming up through the gates, as you do, into London Bridge Station, and I could hear a sort of, you know, noise behind me, a sort of gaggle of 5 or 6 youths, you might say. They were all black. They basically steamed through the, you know, the gate where you're supposed to go if you've got a pushchair. One of them had a ticket, obviously the others didn't, and they were looking to their left to see if anybody was bothering to stop them. Nobody did. And they were having a great time, they were having a laugh, they were, you know, being daring and all of that. And part of me thought, well, they're just, you know, hijinks and all that. But it's lawless. It's completely lawless, and they don't care because they know nobody's going to stop them.
Yeah, and that's because, let's say, we have a police force which is suffering a chronic crisis of confidence. But part of the problem is that police officers are being encouraged to dob other police officers in for the most stupid, ridiculous things. I mentioned on your show a few weeks ago, if you've got a mug in your office that says something like, as I said to you before, if you've got a mug that says, in God we trust, everyone else can stop and search, then you are bad appled by your colleagues, and you can find yourselves being investigated. We have to get rid of this culture of fear within the police force, because it translates to a culture of boldness amongst the criminal fraternity out on the streets. We need a confident police force. We need a police force that the public back. We need a police force that the bosses of the police back, and the college back, and the HMIC back. Otherwise, we're going to have a police force which is ineffective because it is so terrified of doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, exactly right. Good to talk to you, Harry. Thanks very much indeed. Harry Miller, founder of Fair Cop there. Let's get another voice note from Andy.
Mike, Andy in Portsmouth. I can only hope that this scumbucket, vile excuse for a human being today gets the sentence that he truly deserves, but I can just see it now. Some woke judge giving him, well, a lenient sentence, basically. So I hope it doesn't happen, and I hope he gives him a proper life sentence, but with the judicial system in this country, you never know, so...
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fear, it's a worry, Andy, isn't it? Because, you wouldn't be at all surprised, unfortunately, if he was, because he pleaded guilty to the offences, given some kind of leniency. I mean, people will be so angry if that happens, and it really, really doesn't need to happen. It doesn't augur well if that is what happens, because you'd have to surely then say that the Prime Minister will have to intervene. Rob says, Mike, Ian Huntley got a full life term for killing those 2 poor girls, so anything less than full life will be an absolute travesty, says Rob from Catford. And going back to that interview we did yesterday with Lord Carlisle, John says this, you can find it, it's on YouTube if you haven't seen it yet. I would urge you to go and have a look. Brilliant interview with that incompetent Lord Carlisle, Mike, from John in Rotherham. Without doubt, the best piece of broadcast journalism I've ever seen. Keep up the great work, brother. Thank you very much indeed. We will continue to do that. I can't promise you any more lords like that. 10 lords are leaping, or whatever you call it. But we have got Sir Gerald Howarth coming up next, and we'll talk to him about how it's possible for the Navy to chase a Russian spy ship out of British waters, but they can't stop a couple of rubber dinghies. What's going on? This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:39. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through, of course, until 10 a.m. Lisa from Cleveland says, can you please ask experts why we don't televise court cases in full like they do in America? I think we are protected too much from the full reality of crime. Yeah, I mean, you occasionally see the odd sentencing being televised, don't you? But we don't generally, as a rule, have televised court cases in this country. In America, when I lived there, they had a whole channel sort of dedicated to it called Court TV, and of course who can forget the court case that involved what's his face, the football player O.J. Simpson, which was a massive big draw. Millions of people watched it every single day. Absolutely extraordinary. Let's get a voice note from Daryl on knife crime.
Morning, Mike. It's Daryl from Bristol. I think in regards to knife crime, you should just carry an automatic sentence straight away, 10 years imprisonment. You're caught with a knife, whether you're intending to use it or you're carrying one for self-defence, 10 years, automatically in prison. It needs a radical change to shock people into seeing how stupid it is carrying knives. I've got 2 young children myself, one's 11, one's 5. I'm petrified at the thought of what the future holds in regards to them being able to just go out and play normally on the street like a normal child.
Yeah, absolutely right. What a good measured note, Daryl, because, yeah, there has to be some form of punishment for people carrying knives. I mean, I'm led to believe, and I don't know this other than anecdotally, that an awful lot of teenagers, particularly teenage boys now, carry a knife as a matter of course. Some of them say they do it because they're worried they might need it for self-defence. Others do it because they're doing things which they shouldn't be doing. They may be involved in some gang-related activity, that kind of thing. But we've got a 12-year-old boy on the front of the Sun this morning from Birmingham, Leo Ross. described as funny and sweet, attacked and stabbed to death just minutes from his front door on his way home from school. I mean, if that isn't enough to tell the Prime Minister of this country that something needs to be done, and something needs to be done drastically and soon, I don't know what will make him do anything. Let's talk to Sir Gerald Howarth, former Conservative Defence Minister. Sir Gerald, very good morning to you.
Morning to you, Mike.
I know you're not here to talk about knife crime, but just before we get on to the Russian spy ship, I mean, this terrible, terrible latest tragedy involving a little 12-year-old boy stabbed on his way home from school. I mean, we surely need to do something more than is currently being done to get these knives off our streets.
Well, absolutely. The successive governments have been concerned about knife crime, but it's very hard to know exactly what you can do because knives are part of our everyday activity. We need knives in the kitchen. We need some things which can be weaponized in our garden sheds and so on. Yeah. It's the people who do it who are the problem. And I thought that Harry Miller was absolutely right. The police have got to stop going after people like Alison Pearson from the Daily Telegraph for some anti-woke sentiment that she expressed a year ago, and start doing what police are supposed to do, which is to uphold the law and apprehend real criminals, not people engaged in something called non-criminal hate crimes. Absolutely pathetic. And a lot of people have criticized President Trump in the run-up to the presidential election in America. But the fact is that the first action he has taken is to abandon this DEI nonsense. It is permeated the whole of British society, and it's about time that we got real and stopped this politically correct nonsense, because that is what is driving this lawlessness, because the police are not taking the action that I believe many of them would like to take, but are feared to take in case they're accused of racism. It is an absolute disgrace and a betrayal of our people.
Absolutely right. Let's talk about what's going on our high seas, because yesterday it appears that we found out, or at least we were told by Defence Secretary John Healey, that there was a Russian spy ship in our waters. Have a look at this.
A foreign vessel, Yenta, is currently in the North Sea, having passed through British waters. Let me be clear. This is a Russian spy ship used for gathering intelligence and mapping the UK's critical underwater infrastructure. For the last 2 days, the Royal Navy has deployed HMS Somerset and HMS Tyne to monitor the vessel every minute through our waters. And I changed the Royal Navy's rules of engagement so that our warships can get closer and better track the Yenta. And I also want President Putin to hear this message. We see you, we know what you're doing, and we will not shy away from robust action to protect this country.
I actually said earlier, Sir Gerald, that's about the strongest statement I think I've ever heard from anyone in this Labour government so far in the House of Commons, so I suppose we should welcome it.
Yes, indeed, we should welcome it, as did every member of Parliament who asked a question of the Defence Secretary in the House of Commons yesterday afternoon, including my son-in-law, the Shadow Secretary of State for Defence, James Cartledge. And he made the point that this is unusual for the Defence Secretary to be so open and transparent about operational matters, which is, of course, what this is. But the value of being so open and transparent is both to tell the Russian leadership that, as the Secretary of State said, we see you, we know what you're up to, and we will not tolerate Russian aggression, as he said. But as James Cartledge also said, it does send a signal to the British people to understand the seriousness of the threat that we face from Russia. Having said that, of course, these incursions into our waters and indeed into our airspace by Russian Bear aircraft are not new. This is what has been happening ever since the end of the Cold War. And the Royal Air Force are fully equipped to intercept and regularly intercept Russian aircraft who are testing our response. And the significance of this, though, is that it is a message to the British people. It is a public report of things that have been going on in the past which have not been reported. and there's a small change in the rules of engagement to allow British ships to get closer, Royal Navy ships to get closer to these Russian vessels. But of course, the Russians say this is a research vessel, which is complete garbage. It's not a research vessel at all. It's a spy ship, Secretary of State.
And it's got 2 little mini submarines apparently that come off it, right?
I don't know the nature of the Yantar, but this is, as I say, not new. Some of your viewers will remember the Russian, in inverted commas, trawlers.
Yes.
Used to be seen in the North Sea, bristling with the most amazing array of aerials imaginable. Clearly, absolutely nothing to do with trawling except trawling for information. But there is another significance here, and that is that this Yantar Russian ship was spotted in the Irish Sea over what are the cables connecting the island of Ireland and the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
And we rely to 95% of our communications on underwater cables. We saw on Christmas Day that a Russian ship attacked a cable connecting Finland and Estonia. And if this was an operation to investigate our critical national infrastructure by the Russians to see how they could attack us, we need to be on our guard, because things can change in a moment. And if they started cutting our communications, we would be in serious trouble. So there has been a significant shift. And I think it's important for your viewers to know that, in fact, both the heads of the MI6, head of MI6 and the head of the CIA recently made a joint statement saying that the Russians are waging what they call a reckless campaign of sabotage across Europe. People in here need to understand this is real. We can see what's going on in Ukraine, but Ukraine is a manifestation of the rogue nature of the Russian state today.
And it's quite a frightening one, isn't it? One final question. A lot of people asking me, how is it possible the Navy chases a Russian spy ship out of our waters, monitors it, watches it leave, but can't manage to stop an odd dinghy coming across?
An extremely good question. My own view is that the only way you will stop these boats coming across is to take much firmer action. And that means turning the boats back to France, whence they came. Of course, the lawyers will say, oh, it's international water, so you can't do it, you can't do it. We face an existential threat in this country. A wave of migration that we have seen, and I read a report overnight, suggested that there are something like 500,000 illegal migrants in our capital city. The British people are entitled to demand of their politicians an end to this, what my mother described in a letter to the Daily Telegraph in 1967 as alien invasion. It has got to stop. And we cannot sit there in the middle of the ocean and sending the Royal National Lifeboat Institution rescue boats to rescue people who then come to our country. And then, even worse, having got to this country, undertaken this perilous journey, come to our country and then tell us what to do not accept our values, do not accept our traditions, and want to change our culture. It is completely and totally, wholly unacceptable. And that, if anything, was the message from the general election last July, with the rise of reform articulating more clearly than others some of these issues. Kemi Badenoch, I have to say, has articulated those issues clearly. And I think it's up to the Conservative Party now to stand up with the British people and say, enough is enough.
Yeah, very well said. So, Gerald Howarth, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Former Conservative Defence Minister there. Let's get a new voice note, I think, from Sean.
Morning, Mike. Sean from Grimsby here. So, Yvette Cooper, Home Secretary, the legend that she is, instead of doing what most people want done, i.e. stop and search everybody in these areas where people are getting stabbed and increase sentences for carrying knives, no! She comes up with the idea of we'll show 2 forms of ID to get a knife on Amazon. I mean, these people are supposed to be the best and brightest of our country, and they're absolute idiots, mate. As if that's going to do anything. Great show, mate.
Sean, you're absolutely right. They are. They don't seem to ever grasp the right nettle, do they? They go and fix something over there that didn't need fixing. What about the thing that's right in front of you that needs fixing? Fix that, for heaven's sake. This is Talk.
mealy-mouthed non-answers. Look, prevent, its core offer is to prevent, and demonstrably it did not prevent this most heinous of crimes. Therefore, prevent has catastrophically failed in this case. And why don't people, all people, just admit that? It's no good sitting there or standing there and say, prevent is brilliant, it's prevented loads of stuff. It didn't prevent this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:54. This is, of course, the home of common sense. It's the one place where the nation comes to talk. And we're very, very grateful to all of you who are joining the Morning Glory revolution. Donald Trump likes to call it the common sense revolution. We've been having that revolution for some years now here at Talk. And we've got plenty to talk about coming up over the next couple of hours. Liz Webster's here now, the founder of Save British Farming. Liz, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
We've got a few things to talk about this morning. I noticed there's a new OBR report that's out, which basically says that the increase in inheritance tax on farmers will only raise £500 million, which is just about enough to cover the £500 million they want to spend on giving aid to farmers in foreign countries to help them with their climate change targets.
Yeah, by 2029, actually. It's £500 million by 2029, so it's an absolute joke.
Yeah.
And the government are just looking increasingly isolated with their aggressive anti-farming policies, and the country are, rightly so, joining the dots and understanding that you know, surprise, surprise, we need farmers.
Yeah.
You can't just force them out of business like this.
It's really ill thought out, isn't it? I mean, it's hard to believe that it's so ill thought out.
It is, especially given that before they came into government, they were promising so much to farmers. And then they came out with this, which I can only say is a full frontal assault. And whilst it looks as though it's only on farmers, it's actually on all of us, because if you eat, you are in agriculture.
Right.
And the supermarkets are telling you that. They're coming out and sort of saying, well, actually, we've got a slight problem if you get rid of all of these farms, because we're not going to have enough food.
Right. Well, I mean, Morrison's,
I don't know what the Labour government were doing when we had COVID. Everyone else was going out and clapping our farmers. We were essential workers.
Right.
And now, they're coming at us as they say, oh, we don't need food anymore. And we know the aggression that Russia is showing across Europe.
Yeah.
It's a massive threat to us all. And, we do need to go back to the basics that we learnt after the last war. But it seems as though everybody else is doing that, apart from the Labour government, who are increasingly isolated.
Well, I was going to say, it's literally like, it's almost like there's so many policies that are being introduced by this government where the only support for those policies is sort of inside the Cabinet Office or inside Downing Street or on the Labour benches, that nobody else in the country thinks any of it's a good idea. And now, as you say, Tesco's have joined Asda, Morrison's and even Sainsbury's, who have all asked the government to rethink it.
Yeah. It's a shambles, actually. It really is. But for farmers, it's been horrendous. We've had so much to put up with over the last 2 years with COVID, the Ukraine war, the inflation, the weather, and all the Brexit changes. And then we just sort of get this kick in the teeth, and then we're continually pushing and people are behind us, and time again all we get are the same lies, and there are lies, to defend the government's position, and they are defending the indefensible. And when are they going to turn around and actually admit that they got it wrong? I mean, we all know Margaret Thatcher famously said the lady's not for turning, but at some point you look ludicrous when you're defending something which is so wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Do you wonder, as I do, that this is being driven partially by kind of ideology within the Labour movement, where many of them are actually vegans? They don't think that you should be using farm animals for food. They don't think you should be, eating dairy. They don't think you should be eating eggs or cheese or anything like that. As I know there's a fair few of them in the cabinet. I mean, I know it's a bit of a stretch, but I wonder sometimes whether they just don't care about farms.
They are actually quite pro intensification. They're quite pro factory farming. And if a lot of farms collapse, the truth is that you'll get more factory farms, and you'll get more environmental degradation, more animal abuse, and also it's not so healthy to grow food in such intensive ways.
Right.
So I don't know what is driving it, apart from I think that the sort of wanting to get back for the miners' strikes, perhaps, is one
That's
one
even
thing.
more insane, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
and
really
as I said, even vegans eat food that farmers grow, so it doesn't actually make any sense. I think that they've decided to go with this position, and they are stuck with it now, and they're looking comical because the whole country is looking at them sort of saying, this doesn't make any sense.
Right. No, exactly right. Liz, well, we wish you the best of luck, as we always do. We'll keep the pressure up if we can. This is Morning Glory. That's Liz Webster from Save British Farming. We should, shouldn't we?
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's 2 minutes past 8. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10. Peter Hitchens coming up in this hour. Lots of stories to talk about this morning. He's written a big piece in the Mail about Bob Dylan. There's a new film out, of course, which is apparently very, very good indeed. Everybody's raving about it. Peter Hitchens, of course, has his own genuinely different take on it. And, of course, we'll be bringing all that to you. God forgive me, I was one of the millions of young men who wanted to be Bob Dylan. Says Peter Hitchens, or as he's described in the Mail, the freewheeling Peter Hitchens. And he did look a bit like him, actually, in the old days. We'll come to that. Also, we'll talk a bit about this nuclear sub warning off Putin's spy ship, which was found to be surfacing or sailing around the coast of Ireland, supposedly mapping what looked like underwater cables with a view to possibly chopping them in half, which wouldn't be good at all. Meanwhile, we've got Donald Trump basically threatening Vladimir Putin and saying we need to end this ridiculous war because if we don't do it the easy way, we'll have to do it the hard way. He's only been in office for 2 days and he's already doing what he said he would do, which was to end the war. He said he would. Front page of the Sun, a 12-year-old boy, Leo Ross, walking home from his school day in Birmingham, stabbed to death just yards from his front door at the age of 12. Absolutely shocking story. Also a shocking story on the front of the Telegraph. 1 in 12 people in London is now an illegal migrant. So that's nearly 600,000 people by our calculations who are living and working, if they are working in London, and they're not only from this country, but they've come here illegally. They're not all on small boats either. Some of them have come on student visas and work visas that have run out and they've overstayed and they shouldn't be here. It's as simple as that. Incredible stuff. Also, we'll be talking about marriage because there's a story in the Mail today, a survey that's been done that says being married definitely makes you happier. People who are in stable relationships and happy marriages are generally happier people. Are they? Are they really? Dale Vince is coming on later. We'll ask him because he's just paid out 40.5 million quid to his ex-wife, who he described as toxic. Doesn't sound very happy, does it? 5 past 8, this is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. Meanwhile, as you just heard, there's still a problem with the tax on farmers because farmers are rapidly going to be going out of business. All the major supermarkets now are backing the farmers' campaign to get the inheritance tax changed and the rules changed so that the government doesn't carry on with this seemingly mindless attack on the people that make the food that we eat in this country. Also, Rachel Reeves seems to be on collision course with her cabinet colleagues, particularly Ed Miliband, over net zero. She says net zero isn't as important as growth. And so, therefore, she wants to be able to put a third runway into Heathrow. We'll also keep you updated on what's going on in Plymouth, where armed police swooped last night around about 9 p.m. looking for an attacker who is said to have committed a series of stabbings. We're not quite sure exactly who they're looking for. They still appear to be watching for an assailant, and there's been a lot of armed police spotted, an awful lot of police action as well. So we'll keep you updated on that as and when we can. Let's say a very good morning, though, to Peter Hitchens. Peter, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us. I'm intrigued by your piece in the Mail today about Bob Dylan. You're always surprising people. I suppose some people might not have realised that you'd be such a big Bob Dylan fan that you actually wanted to be him.
Well, I think, as I explained in the article, a lot of young men at the time wanted to be him because they wanted to get the girl, particularly the lovely Susie Rosolo, who features on the cover of that LP, as we used to call him, walking down the New York street with both her arms around his left arm in that very, very, how should I put it, warm embrace. I think we all envied that, and we thought, if we weren't, as many of us were not and still are not, enormously tall, handsome, sporting types, but weedy, intellectual would-be poets and journalists, that we could actually get the girl, and we identified with Dylan on that basis. This is an honest confession. I just thought it'd be funny to recall it because it's so long ago now that I don't think anyone can really.
And I've just been asked to point out that picture that we can see there on the right of the screen is actually you and not Bob Dylan.
That's in my Trotskyist days.
Very impressive sideburns, I have to say.
They're not bad, are they? I once had a long row with Matthew Norman of The Guardian, who claimed that I'd had a beard at the time. I said absolutely no, but alas, that picture, which would have solved the argument, was not available. It only emerged thanks to the amazing work of picture researcher at the Mail on Sunday, Nikki Sutherland, who can find anything. And I told her that there were no pictures of me in that era, and she said, "Oh yes, there are." And 6 weeks later, she came up with that one. It existed for 50 years without my knowing it.
Brilliant. I once saw him. It's like a lot of these things, the Rolling Stones included. I once saw Bob Dylan at a place called Tanglewood, just outside of Boston.
Oh, yeah.
Which is where the Boston Symphony play in the summer, and a friend of mine was running it, and so I got tickets, and he was awful. It was during his period of sort of faux Christianity, if you remember. He sort of toyed with converting to Christianity for a while, and he made this album all about God.
I wouldn't hold that against anybody, and I have to say, of all his many phases, it's one of which I can probably approve more than somebody else. But I'd given up listening to him long before then, and when I'd heard that people went to his concerts, where he either sang songs they'd never heard or cheerfully mangled the ones they knew so they were barely recognizable. And my own view is that for many, many years he's been having a laugh at our expense anyway, which I think was summed up beautifully in his accepting the Nobel Prize in Literature and then not going to collect it, sending poor Patti Smith to go and sing Hard Rain's Going to Fall in front of all these Swedes. But it was, I thought, that was a masterstroke. There they were trying to cash in on his fame and ultra superstar celebrity, and he didn't come. I could hear a sort of cawing laughter from the business wherever he is now.
Yeah.
So there's something enjoyable. But part of the piece is that he did go through another much more interesting phase, which the film touches on but doesn't fully understand. And both Pete Seeger and Susie Rotolo, who were very, very influential in his life, and of course Pete Seeger pretty much made him a star, had been very hardline communists in their time. And what Susie's parents were, she was a cradle communist, were very, very much so. And I think he was captured by that cause. And a lot of his songs, if you have any Marxist education, a lot of his early songs contain a great deal of very communist themes, which people weren't aware of. And I think it was his departure from his left-wing orthodoxy into basically commercial pop when he went electric, which enraged people far more than the fact that he just had an electric guitar. And that's the other point that I make. The film makes the going electric the great parting of the ways. I think it was his decision to, as I say, to leave behind all the protest song left-wing stuff, which made them so cross.
Yeah, indeed. Fascinating stuff.
Still a fantastic writer of songs. I mean, some people have actually claimed, and I think there's an argument for this, that he is genuinely a poet.
Yes.
And there's some of the stuff that he wrote, there are lines in it which are so beautiful that it's extraordinary. But other lines in it, again, he is just obviously having a laugh at our expense.
Yeah, I think so. Let's move on to more serious matters. Russia. Donald Trump came out yesterday and said what I suppose you might have expected him to say, which is it's time to end this ridiculous war. I'm assuming that you'll be in favour of this.
Well, I'd be in favour of ending it, but I'm not sure that Donald J. Trump has any particular ideas as to how to set about it. And both Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky are very much cemented in their positions. Putin can't really make much in the way of concessions without falling into grave trouble with the ultra-nationalists who stand behind him. And the same is largely true of Vladimir Zelensky. If he were to make any major concessions, I think that he would be destroyed by his own supporters, particularly those from west of Ukraine, who are ferociously anti-Russian and regard any kind of compromise, as they always say, the word they use is capitulation. So I don't think either of them is particularly free to move, and I'm not sure that Donald Trump has any way of breaking that. As far as I can tell, the only threats he's making are economic, and I'm really not sure that trade and business between Russia and the United States is that great that the loading tariffs on Russian imports and all this is going to have much effect. If that's all he's got, then I don't think he'll get very far. There may be something else that he's cooking up. I simply don't know. But I was never, as you know, I'm not wild about Mr. Trump, put it mildly. I ran into some trouble at a debate on Monday in London for being critical of him. And I don't think that he necessarily has a particularly intelligent or worked out view. A lot of people imagine, because of the crazy claims that he was in Putin's pocket during his first presidential campaign, a lot of people imagine that there is some great friendship between him and the Kremlin. Yeah. I don't think that's necessarily true. And again, if he hasn't got any more than that, I can't quite see how he's going to get it. And it's not necessarily in the interests of either leader to actually have peace. Some sort of stalemate may well be what ultimately emerges, a permanent frozen conflict. So let's see what he comes up with. He has capacity to surprise. On the other hand, an awful lot of Donald Trump's actions since the inauguration have basically been public relations. Their statements. He issues all these presidential orders, but many of them will be very hard to implement. It looks good, it sounds good, it makes his supporters feel good, but in practice, what will it add up to? The idea, for instance, that in 4 years in the White House you can undo 60 years of cultural and moral revolution in the USA is pretty hard to take. And the only actually significant executive thing he seems to do is release all the people who invaded the Capitol building on the.
I mean, I think he's made some things happen
on that night in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's not going to be able to stop the problems with the border and the illegal migrants overnight. But certainly there seems to be some suggestion that he's setting about it already. He hasn't just not done anything about it, and people are apparently some people are apparently now deporting themselves, if you like, because they don't particularly want to be deported, arbitrarily. So they're going back the other way across the border.
Have you visited the U.S. border?
Not recently.
Well, I haven't visited recently, but I did some time ago. I made a point of spending some time down there with the Border Patrol, particularly near El Paso and Juarez. And it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to close because it's so long.
It's very porous.
So much of it runs through areas that are uninhabited. And I don't know quite how much you need to spend, both on electronic surveillance and on people, to seal it. But I think it would be an enormous task. Remember, his pledge in his first election was to build a great wall.
But this is what I'm saying. So I don't think that works, and that's why, for that very reason, as you just outlined, that you can't really stop people coming. So what you have to do is what we keep saying to Keir Starmer you have to do, which is to discourage people from coming in the first place, making it clear that if they do come, they'll be sent straight back.
Well, again, that's difficult though too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rounding up huge numbers of people, and can you get the countries in which they came to take them back?
Yeah.
Which is a problem which we have. The whole situation in international law, the countries which have illegal migration on a large scale, is very difficult because they've often concealed their origins when they arrived, and the countries from which they came can say, well, how can you prove these people came from our country? They've got no identity documents which we've issued. Why are you sending them back here? We don't want them. And then you're stuck. This is one of the real difficulties with illegal migration. But it is you can say we're going to send you back, but I remember my colleague Richard Littlejohn when those Afghan hijackers arrived in this country saying that they'll still be here in 20 years' time, and lo, they were.
Well, my favourite one of my favourite stories of the last week or two has been the one from France, where this very kindly and sort of rather left-wing theatre group decided to open up its doors to do a theatre show for some illegal migrants who were hanging around in the town, and they've now decided to move in. So they finished.
Yeah, Fred Kelly did a very good piece in the Daily Mail about that the other day. Yeah,
they're still there.
It's quite. There is an irony in it that these left-wing people suddenly found out what it was they were really promoting.
Yeah.
If you haven't read the Fred Kelly pieces, it was in last Saturday. Look it up on the internet. It is. It's a very good account of the event.
It is. And this morning we see in the Telegraph, 1 in 12 people in London is an illegal migrant, and not necessarily a person that's come on a small boat, but more likely to be actually a student who's overstayed a visa, or even somebody who's come on a work visa and who hasn't gone home. And so, once it starts, it's very difficult to stop it, isn't it?
Yeah, and you need a pretty tight police state to do much about it. People often say, "Oh, well, we should do this what the continental countries do and have a system of identity cards to control these people." But again, in France, which has such a system, there are hundreds of thousands of illegals living in France, pretty much unregulated, and they don't seem to be able to do anything about that, despite having a pretty strong state. I don't know what you do about it. This is the difficulty. Unless you stop people arriving in the first place, you have this immense difficulty of getting rid of them. And then, to me, very reluctantly, the task then falls on us to integrate and to end this ridiculous policy of state multiculturalism in which people are assumed to be separate, and to get people to become British. But for that to happen, you really are going to need a long moratorium during which the immigration was cut down.
Yeah, you'd have to stop. You just have to stop.
Minimum.
You'd have to stop asylum applications. I mean, we did that with Syria, didn't we? I think in the back end of last year, December, basically UK and other European countries said they will suspend the processing of asylum applications from Syrians after the fall of the Assad regime. But I mean, equally, we went and looked for people, didn't we? Because the sort of the monetisation of the higher education sector, you know, the ridiculous selling off of all of our universities was the result, which then led to people being sort of recruited, if you like, from all around the world, because these massive businesses wanted more and more students.
All kinds of people wanted there to be large-scale immigration, including a very big faction in New Labour. I still go back to the amazing article, which you can again still find on the web, by Andrew Neather, Neather, in which he describes, this is a New Labour apparatchik, describes the desire for there to be a large-scale migration to change the country, and which is never stated in public by anyone but him. I'm sure that the Labour apparatus have always been furious with Mr. Neither for revealing this, but they wanted it, and people, of course, wanted the servants, which is effectively what they are, which the new rich in London have taken advantage of. What large-scale migration often means is the availability of cheap servants on a large scale in this country for the first time since about 1914, and so they have a strong interest in it too, and other people just want cheap labour of other kinds. And the people, of course, who have to cope with this most of all are the people who don't benefit from it economically or socially, the poor, whose own wage levels are held down by large-scale immigration, and also who have to deal with the enormous pressure on housing, the health service and transport and education, which follows when you get mass immigration. It's a simple politics for anybody on either the left or the right that the time has come to put a strong limit on it. And this is why I think I've said to you before, the most fascinating politician in Europe is this left-wing woman, Sarah Wagenknecht in Germany, who turned to her left-wing comrades and said, why are you being so stupid? The reason why the neo-Nazis are doing well is not because German people are Nazis. They're not. They're just cheesed off. And they're entitled to be cheesed off. It's time that the left wing took on this issue and started being in favour of immigration restriction, and she's doing very well. People always go on and on about the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, the really right-wing party with the fishy people in it, but they never mention. You very seldom hear British media mentioning Sarah Wagenknecht, because the idea of a left-wing person being against mass immigration is quite disturbing to them, because it makes them wonder whether they ought to do the same thing. I wish they would. It's essential for social stability that we cope with the immigration we've already had, and I think that's probably the most civilized way of doing. Getting people to leave a country on a large scale is very difficult to do, and it could also lead to quite serious problems of its own. So it's a reluctant acceptance. I've probably said more against mass immigration over the past 25 years than most people, but if it's happened, you have a different problem.
Yeah, exactly right.
Is to bring an end to it, and then seriously set out to integrate those who come.
Yeah, absolutely, and then eventually you have to stop people coming. Peter, thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens, columnist of the Mail on Sunday, there with a view on a great many things. Let's get a voice note from James.
Morning, Mike. Superb speech from Trump the other night. Absolutely superb. He certainly loves America. No one can deny that. Not like our Prime Minister. My God, Mike, he puts my feet to sleep. He's so boring. There's nothing to him, Mike. He's literally just like a Dalek. Then you've got Lammy, Miliband, Cooper. Terrible, Mike. Absolutely terrible.
It's a terrible lineup, isn't it? You wouldn't put any of them out in the first team, normally speaking. James, well said. Thank you very much indeed. Just a quick one here. I've been meaning to read this out for a while. It's about immigration from Denise. She says, "Morning, Mike. I love your show. I'm French and came to England in 1977 to improve my English. I fell in love with the English people, met my husband and stayed here. I was traced by the police because I hadn't told the Home Office of my change of status. I've tried to become British, but this is very difficult and very expensive. Due to that, I'm not allowed to vote for the national election. I can for the local ones only. How come all the migrants have the right to vote? I had a business and employed a lot of people, paid all my tax in England. It's very strange." Well, I'm not sure migrants are allowed to vote unless they become citizens. They can, if they're European, well, they used to be, if they were European citizens, allowed to vote in local elections and regional elections like the Scottish Parliament or the Welsh Assembly, or the Senedd, as it's now called. But I don't think migrants can vote in general elections unless they are actually citizens and they're residents here. But anyway, we'll come back to that. If Axel is able to vote as an adult, if he was still living in Wales, says Mike in Shropshire, then why shouldn't he be sentenced as an adult? Keep up the good work. That's on the Southport sentencing, which is coming up around about 11 o'clock this morning here. You'll hear it all live right here on Talk.
Do you know how much wind energy we're generating at the moment? As we speak, 0.7% of our energy is coming from wind turbines.
Come on, let's have a round of applause for that. Well done.
2%
is that of our energy or of our electricity?
Of our electricity. And,
which is only 20% of our energy needs.
Yes, that's right. And 2% is coming from solar power.
How?
Now,
I mean, I'm looking out there. How?
4 p.m, the sun's going to come down. Energy requirements are going to go up because it's going to get colder.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 26 minutes past 8, and we're here, of course, until 10 o'clock for a glorious hours of Morning Glory every single weekday morning from 6 until 10. Julie Hartley-Brewer will be here just before 10. The sun's shining out there today. It's a little bit cold. There's a big storm coming, apparently, tomorrow, which is supposedly going to cause all manner of mayhem on the roads and on the trains and on the planes and all the rest of it. We'll keep you updated with all of that as well. One here from Steve, who says, I wonder what Trump might do if Russian spy vessels were found in US waters. Tell them awfully politely to go away and stop it like we do. No, probably not. And Mike says, great show as usual. It was a Russian surface ship. Any fool could have spotted it. Wonder how many submarines sneaked by while we spotted the obvious. Putin is not a fool. Well, that's an interesting point as well. Maybe it was some kind of decoy ship and there was actually something else going on beneath the surface of the waves. But I'm sure that the guys in the Navy are pretty good at figuring all that stuff out. And as I say, John Healey, who actually, if you were to ask me who's probably the best performer and perhaps the cleverest minister in Parliament right now, it's probably John Healey. You know, he seems sensible, he seems straightforward. His statement to the House was the best statement I've heard from a government minister since July the 4th, to be honest. He seems to know his brief, he seems to know what he's doing. Maybe he should be Prime Minister instead of Starmer. Let's face it. Let's talk to Ross Clark, though. He's got a big piece in The Sun today, page 10. It says this: if the UK economy gets as bad as Argentina, you'll need a chainsaw too, Reeves. And that's, of course, a message to Rachel from Accounts, who's been over in Davos this week, talking up the Great Depression that we're going through here, claiming that she's drawn a line under the chaotic fiscal policy of the Tory party and created stability, which, of course, she hasn't. Ross, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
I mean, I don't know whether Rachel Reeves suffers from self-delusion or just delusion in general, but whenever I see her speak, she doesn't remotely address what the problems are. She doesn't remotely admit that there are problems, and she seems to suggest that she's doing a good job to everyone that asks her, when she's clearly not.
No, well, I mean, this whole story was bouncing off the government borrowing figures, which released yesterday, which showed that the government was forced to borrow £17.8 billion in December alone. That's just for 1 month. And, you know, we're getting to a stage where we're paying over £100 billion a year just to service government debt. That's more than we pay on education. It's more than we pay on defence. It's about 3/5 of what we pay on the NHS. Yeah. You know, if we didn't have that huge burden of debt to bear, we would be able to have, you know, higher spending on public service, or better still, tax cuts. Right. And yeah, Rachel Reeves is partly to blame for this. She came into office. One of her first moves was to award all these fat pay rises to public sector workers without even asking for any improvements to productivity in return. The tax rises, which she announced in the budget on 30th of October to help pay for these pay rises, well, they don't come into effect until April. Right. And even when they do come into effect, of course, they might not raise as much revenue as she hopes, because, as we found out with the unemployment figures earlier in the week, firms are reacting to these tax rises by hiring fewer people. The unemployment is on the rise.
Well, quite. And we also learned just yesterday, I think, that the amount of money that they're likely to raise from the farming inheritance tax is probably more likely to be in the region of 500 million quid over several years. So it's really not the windfall that they expected it to be, even if it goes ahead. And in fact, it will only match the amount of money they want to give away to foreign farmers to help them with their climate change targets.
Yeah, so what we're sort of getting into is this era of punitive taxes which aren't really designed to raise large amounts of revenue, or certainly won't raise huge amounts of revenue, but sort of punish people. They're sort of punishing farmers, and VAT on private school bills are punishing parents for opting out the state system and sending their children private. And that's another tax rise, which is probably not going to raise very much money net, because, of course, you know, some parents will already have taken their children out of the private system, and they're going to have to be educated in the state school system. So that's an extra expense.
Right. And they claimed that was going to allow them to hire 6,500 new teachers. But one, there's no sign of that happening at the moment, as far as I can tell. And two, that doesn't even mean you'll get one new teacher for about every 4 schools in the country.
No, and it's, you know, as I go back, it's just a purely sort of punitive tax. But at one point, I do think it's important to make this debt problem is not Rachel Reeves's problem alone, much as we might like to blame her for it. The fact is that no UK government of either colour has managed to balance the public books in 22 years. 2001, 2002 was the last year in which a UK government actually managed to run a small surplus, and every year since, come rain or shine, we've been piling debt onto the books, and that has really got to the stage now where it is becoming unsustainable.
Yes, it really is absolutely ridiculous. Good to talk to you, though, Ross. It's a great piece. It's in the Sun this morning, page 10. Reference, of course, to Argentina is because of Javier Milei, who is the president of Argentina. He was famously pictured with a chainsaw shortly before he took it to the red tape and the bureaucracy of the civil service in Argentina, and he's actually managed to cut back so much on the expenditure of the government that he's got that back into surplus as well. Meanwhile, of course, in the Sun, they've also got a leader about Jonathan Reynolds, who was with Rachel Reeves in Davos yesterday, saying that he wants ambitious talks to align Britain more closely with Brussels regulations. They asked the question, has he gone mad? It's a perfectly good question. Let's get a voice note from Steve.
Good morning, Mike. This is Stephen Hertfordshire. I'd just like to point out another example of our two-tier justice system. During the Southport riots, people were given lengthy prison sentences for posting memes on Facebook. Yet, drill rappers who openly encourage violence, murder, knife crime are celebrated by the BBC and promoted by the BBC. You want to know why young kids are going out stabbing each other? Look on YouTube.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point, Steve. Thank you very much for making it. A lot of you have got things to say about the stabbings that are going on in this country. Don't forget, we're keeping an eye as well on what's happening in Plymouth, where there was an incident last night. Somebody was stabbed in the street, as we understand it. Armed police are still looking for the assailant in that case. And I've got this from Neil, who says, Mike, I've just been reading reports about the knife attack in Plymouth. Now, bearing in mind that the attacker is still at large, don't you think the police would give a description of who they are looking for? I smell a rat. Well, yeah, you would think, wouldn't you? I don't know what it's like down in Plymouth at the moment. I mean, has anybody been given a description of the man that they're looking for, or the woman that they're looking for, the person they're looking for? I don't know. Mike says this, given the recent events in Southport, Rochdale and Oldham, do you think those who criticise Suella Braverman for stating that multiculturalism has failed will now reconsider their stance and offer her an apology? It's a very good point. We'll find out about that. Coming up next, though, we're going to talk about the sentencing that's coming up later on this morning. Axel Radicubana will be sentenced, but probably not to a full life term, because he's likely to be sentenced as a 17-year-old juvenile, which in my mind is absolute and utter madness. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk next to James Sunderland.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 8:37. I'm Mike Graham. This from Shaz, who says, "Morning, Mike. I've just returned home via Auckland Airport and Dubai Airport. The security I was subjected to was very strict, as it should be. However, on arrival at Birmingham Airport, the anything to declare desk was unmanned, and a notice advised people to fill in a form online." Yeah, right. What a laughingstock the UK government is. I think that's right, absolutely. And Phil says, if two-tier Keir says we shouldn't be curtailing to cultural sensitivities, why then will the government not provide crime figures by ethnicity and region? Also, a very good point. Let's talk now, though, to James Sunderland, former Conservative MP, because coming up later on this morning, around about 11 o'clock, we expect Axel Rudikabana, the Southport killer, will be sentenced. According to all the information we've got, he will probably more than likely be sentenced as a juvenile, because he was not quite 18 when he committed the heinous murders that he committed and killed those 3 little girls in the Southport dance studio. James, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
I mean, I know that there will be those who say they understand the law better than I do, who say that this is the way the law works and this is why he has to be sentenced as a juvenile. But certainly there could be an exception made, as far as I understand it, and I believe that there should be an exception made, shouldn't there?
Mike, I'm not a lawyer, sadly, and I suspect that the judgment today will be rigid alongside judicial guidelines. So I suspect that he'll be sentenced as he needs to be, whether he's a juvenile or not. But clearly a heinous crime, utter evil, and, you know, one's heart goes out to the innocent victims and their families.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, we debated long and hard yesterday with various different people about whether or not Keir Starmer was right to withhold information, as he said he did, in order to avoid the possible danger of ruining the future trial of this monster. But I spoke to Michael Mansfield, a very eminent judge, a very eminent barrister and lawyer, who basically agreed with me that Keir Starmer should have and could have said more. Let's have a look.
Obviously, you can see in this case why there was a problem, because they find Al-Qaeda bomb-making guidance and so on, a book about that. They find ricin. It looks pretty much as though it might be, but it looks, and now, of course, looking back, they're able to say in the context that it was this individual. But that doesn't mean to say he hasn't got a terror-related, because if you possess items that might be of use to a terrorist, then you're guilty of a terrorist-related offence.
Right.
Now, I think Keir was perfectly entitled at the time, if he wanted to say it's potentially related to terrorism,
right,
but I can't give you the details.
Which would have been a much more sensible thing to do than to say nothing at all, wouldn't it?
You know what, I listened to Keir Starmer's statement yesterday, and I play with a straight bat, and I had no fundamental problem with anything he said. And I can understand his wish, if that's true, for him not to prejudice the outcome of any trial. However, there's a deeper issue here. Labour government clearly knew at the time, Angela Rayner said it at the time, that they didn't think that the incident was terrorist-related. Evidence now clearly suggests that it was. And I have a certain sympathy, actually, for those who went out frustrated onto the streets because they were the victims themselves of a cover-up. The government at the time could easily have said that it was a terrorist-related incident. No problem at all. The precedent's been set many, many, many times before with other related incidents. So I'm afraid I feel very strongly as though there has been a cover-up, and I feel as though, for reasons known only to the Labour government, they made the decision obviously not to inflame tensions, but to keep it under wraps until the trial.
Yeah, and I wonder whether we would all be better off in this world in which we coexist with each other if people were just honest about their motivation for doing things. I mean, if Keir Starmer had come out and said, look, it was a very febrile atmosphere, we took a decision not to give out any information for fear that that might have made things even worse, right? And I think people might have even understood that and said, OK, well, at least you've come clean and done it. I mean, I don't think he should have done it, because I happen to believe believe in transparency. He says he does. I happen to believe in politicians being honest. I don't think that Prime Ministers should withhold information. I'm a bit of an absolutist about this. I don't think it's right that the CPS and or the politicians of this country should decide, you know, what we need to know and what we don't need to know. There are very clear rules about contempt of court. I know what they are, and I know exactly what you can and cannot say. And he could have said a lot more. And I think he's kind of hiding behind this definition of terrorism, which he's almost constructed for himself so that he can get out of it.
Mike, he's hiding behind a number of things. I mean, interesting comments yesterday about prevent. He's clearly distancing himself from prevent and the ability, I think, of the security services to deal with these lone wolves. It's very, very hard to intercept them if they're not communicating. We could talk about incels and the impact of that, and that's a very interesting topic in itself. But what is interesting for me is that this is the dichotomy at the heart of socialism. In other words, socialists are very, very happy to be apologists for everything, but are not willing to take any responsibility for anything themselves.
Right.
And my frustration with politics at the moment is the fact that we need more politicians in Westminster who say it as it is. I said it as it is. I went in for the right reasons. The majority of politicians actually in Westminster are really good people working hard on both sides of the House. But how fantastic would it be for us as politicians to get rid of the spin, to start saying things as they are, to be honest with the electorate, and just to call it out when things are clearly wrong?
Yeah, I think the electorate are grown-ups. You know, the electorate are very smart people, which I think the Labour government currently doesn't really seem to appreciate, you know, almost as though they're treating people like children because, you know, they might misbehave, or don't give them this information, they might misuse it, or, you know. But the idea is that they've created a vacuum by doing that and by not sharing information that we should have the right to know, quite rightly. I mean, I don't know of any situation really, aside from those disturbances in the summer, where anyone has ever had retribution, you know, foisted upon them by you know, crazed groups of people in this country because terrible crimes have been committed. I mean, it just doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen at all. We've got to be honest. Why? Because we're all part of the solution. You know, the best weapon we have against terrorism is our eyes. If we are vigilant, if we see things that aren't quite right, the guy sat in the corner with the long coat with something under his jacket. Yeah. I mean, it's obvious to me that you can spot these things and intervene and intercept. And this is a community response. Prevent is about the community coming together, identifying problems and dealing with it. So this cover-up is completely counterintuitive to me because we have a collective responsibility to make sure that the UK is as safe as it can be.
Absolutely right. And the head of the terror watchdog, Jonathan Hall, is of the same opinion. I mean, he was of the opinion that more information is better than less information, and it can still be given out without fear of actually contravening any contempt of court rules and without putting a trial actually in jeopardy. But he's actually come out as well and said, as a result of what Keir Starmer said the other day about the definition of terrorism, that if you broaden it too much, that it might end up sort of catching other people who are not terrorists in that particular net. I don't know why this is so complicated. I think, for me, it's pretty straightforward who a terrorist is, but it's not Lucy Letby, it's not football hooligans, and it's not sort of murderers, you know, which is what he's saying it could entail if Keir Starmer expands the meaning. I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, I think you're an ex-army man. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious what the definition of a terrorist is, isn't it?
It is very obvious, and yesterday, Keir Starmer saying that this is somehow a new kind of terrorism, the lone wolf. No, it's not. It's always been there.
Right.
It's young people, mainly men, incels perhaps, radicalised online and committing these heinous crimes. It's always been there. But the point that he was making yesterday, and he was right, that the security services are finding it very hard to deal with that. It's impossible to stop, which is why we have to share the information early. We have to, you know, take a collective responsibility. We can't keep it out of the public domain. This idea that Number 10 can control what people are thinking and how they act is complete nonsense. We're all part of the same community. We all have a collective interest in keeping our children safe. And I'm afraid that the way the government's handled this, in my view, is not quite right.
No, they haven't done very well at all. I mean, so in terms of what this review will prove, I'm not sure they're sort of turning the light on themselves, as it were, because I said the other day, if Keir Starmer wants to have a proper inquiry into what happened after the Southport murders, he only needs to interview himself, doesn't he? Because he seems to be the guy at the head of the snake, if you like. He's the guy that's making all the decisions. He's the one who didn't interact with the public when he went up to Southport. We see him there. He stood there for 19 seconds People were shouting at him. You know, it would have done him no harm at all to turn around and say something and just say, look, I feel your pain. I know how angry you are. We're dealing with it. You know, please let the authorities get on with it. Why couldn't he have done something like that?
Well, I can recall vividly the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, instructing MPs of the House not to discuss it. Default notice on that. I can recall Angela Rayner saying in the media that she didn't think that it was terrorist-related, knowing full well that it was.
Right, and also, worse than that, saying anyone who spreads that is spreading fake news.
Totally agree. This has been fake news all the way through, and I do have a certain sympathy for those who felt so outraged by the whole situation that went onto the streets. I'm not condoning violence for 1 second, but actually, let's look at those sentences at that point in time and think, actually, was there an element of mitigation there? Were people right to be outraged because they knew they were being lied to? I feel very strongly as though this is now the time to stop the spin. This is now the time to address this issue collectively. You know, let's not bash our police. They do a fantastic job. Let's not bash our councillors. Let's not bash the prevent teams or the security services. They're doing the best they possibly can. But we're all part of the solution. So having that severance, you know, severing the public from number 10 and this them and us approach, I'm afraid, is not the right way to do it.
And there's no point in saying you want to be transparent and we should be transparent, and then the next thing you do is you don't be transparent. You know, it's hypocritical and people are fed up with it. And if you want the public to come along with you, if you're a politician, then you have to be straight with them. And you can't be withholding information from them on the grounds that you think they might not be able to deal with it. You know, that's nonsensical to me.
It's a funny old thing, isn't it? Politicians being straight, being honest, saying things as it is. I went into politics for the right reasons, and I believe that the majority of my colleagues are also there for the right reasons. But come on, let's govern with a sense of responsibility. Let's govern with a sense of honesty. Let's stop the spin, let's stop the nonsense, and let's start thinking about the solution.
Yeah. James, well said. Thank you very much indeed. James Sunderland there, former Conservative MP, basically telling us that Keir Starmer's got this massively wrong. Well, we could have told you that as well. Let's get a voice note from Sam.
Morning, Mike. Fantastic show. Going over to the other side of the pond with the Trump administration, all these people that are saying that he's a Nazi, I don't understand it, because at his inauguration, he had a rabbi, Jewish. He had a black gentleman, pastor, who I actually thought was quite cool. Surely if he was a Nazi, none of that would have happened at all. And he wouldn't have made that statement that he'll support LGBTQ. He just wants the facts of male and female is male and female biologically. Simples.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's absolutely no way that he's a Nazi. The way that these people carry on, like saying that Elon Musk made a Nazi salute, I mean, they're completely insane. I mean, it was a fantastic piece of video, which I think we're watching a little bit there, of J.D. Vance going into the Oval Office for the first time as Vice President of the United States of America. He'd never been there before, and because it's not the sort of place you go. And the tweet that I saw that accompanied it as he was being shown around, and he was going, wow, this is amazing. It said, only in America could you be born into the household that he was born into. His mother, you know, raised him pretty much on her own as a single mother. All sorts of issues with his father, with his family, with alcohol, with drink and drugs and all manner of things. Here he is now as the second most powerful man probably in the world, if you want to call America the world's policeman. And he walks into the Oval Office for the first time as a man who could be sitting behind that desk if anything happened to Donald Trump. Extraordinary, quite extraordinary. It's 10 minutes to 9. This is Talk. It's obviously a very horrid situation for everybody. There is some disquiet, is there not, at the very least, about the way that the authorities have handled all of this.
At the moment, I think people here are just in that panicked fight or flight mode. It really is. You're in the lap of the gods. Everybody's on edge. Nobody feels safe.
As you know, where I live is on fire right now. Literally, the entire city of the Pacific Palisades is burning.
Any message from you to Governor Newsom or Karen Bass tonight?
Spend less on hair gel. What can I say to them? Not big admirer of either.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 8:54. We still haven't found out what's going on in Plymouth, by the way. The police are being very tight-lipped. They still haven't actually offered any sort of indicator as to who they're looking for, what that person might look like, and what they're looking for them for, as it were. So I've no idea what the police down there are up to, but they're certainly keeping stum about everything else that's been going on. Lorraine says this via Southport. Starmer has actually lied to and misled the British public, as has Angela Rayner. He removed parliamentary privilege to ministers who were right to question, and he locked up the far right for questioning the truth. This is the crux of the matter. He then subsequently lied when he spoke to the nation this week. This was a deliberate and intentional act to cover his own backside. He is dishonest and untrustworthy. Lorraine, I couldn't agree more. I said all this on the day. I just don't think he's doing anything other than constructing a kind of a cage around himself and protecting himself with wrong use of language and pretending that certain words don't mean certain things and certain other words mean certain... I mean, I've never heard anyone get into a debate about the meaning of the word terrorism. Absolutely ridiculous. Let's go over now, though, to Germany, because there was an attack yesterday in Germany where 2 people died, one of them a 2-year-old child. It was an attack, I believe, on a kindergarten group, and a man from Afghanistan has been held. He has apparently shown psychological problems. He attacked a 2-year-old boy and an adult, injured 2 others. He carried a knife into this German kindergarten group. Let's find out what happened. Rob, a very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
We, of course, are sitting here determining the definition of a word terrorist. I understand the German authorities are struggling with the same definitions. They say this was not a terrorist attack.
Yes, it's difficult because Scholz actually did say it was an act of terror, but I think there's a sort of widespread understanding often that a terrorist event has to be sort of organised terrorism, so linked to some sort of terrorist group. But if it's something which goes and terrorises the people, then it's still also being called an act of terror. We had a similar situation with the Christmas market attacks in Magdeburg.
Right. I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? Because people, certainly the people of this country, perceive that this is politicians kind of playing with the language, really, because they know that if they call it a terrorist attack, that they're worried that somehow the people will react in some way, particularly, or take it out on some minority group or something like that. But the world needs to grow up about all this, don't they?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's an awful lot of resentment and frustration here in Germany because, I mean, I think people are very aware of, the Magdeburg attack that's just happened, and then they're aware of Solingen because that was so awful, and the stabbing, and they were aware of, for example, in 2016 in Berlin, a Christmas market attack.
Yeah.
But what they're not necessarily aware of all the other stabbings which have happened, and I was actually surprised, but perversely delighted that Scholz actually, when he reacted to this, he actually said, I'm sick of this happening every other week.
Yeah.
So just if it's not bombarding you with statistics. So, for example, in 2016, so this is the same year as the Christmas market attacks, you also had it was an Afghan refugee on a train with an axe, injuring 5 people down in Würzburg. There was an Afghan asylum seeker raped a medical student in the same year. The next year, an Afghan asylum seeker fatally stabbed a girl. The next year, an Iraqi asylum seeker raped and murdered a girl. I could go on and on.
Sure. And we could do similar things here, and it's time, I think, that the governments of Western Europe realise that this whole idea of assimilation and mass immigration, at the very least, has not worked. But at the worst, it needs to be examined, because an awful lot of the people that are coming to Western Europe are clearly traumatised individuals who've been involved in some horrible, violent acts where they've come from, and so therefore are not likely to behave in the same way as people who are used to living in Western Europe.
I think that's absolutely right, and there's been all sorts of problems with how to deal with this. There's been a lot of problems with the church, because the church has actually kind of circumvented German law and allowed people to come and stay, and that's caused problems. But the system itself, in terms of dealing with people who, as you said, are traumatized and have got psychological problems, is really failing. So in the case of this attacker yesterday, he should actually have had to have left Germany, but he just declared voluntary deportation. I'll be going, and then the process ended, and he stayed. In the case of Solingen, the police came round to deport this person, and he just didn't. He just left his house for the day, and because he then wasn't there, they ended the procedure for 6 months. So there's really critical flaws in the system.
Yeah, absolutely right. Same as here. Rob, listen, great to talk to you. We must do this some more. Very good to see it. Robert Hyde there reporting in from Germany, where they had yet another fatal attack by an Afghan refugee, killing 2 people, one of them a 2-year-old child. Absolutely unbelievable. When is this world going to wake up? For heaven's sake. This is Talk. I'm Mike Graham.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. 2 minutes past 9. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. The sun is up. It's a bit cold out there. There's a big storm coming, apparently. A storm Iowin, I think it's called. Which sounds a bit Welsh. It's apparently going to wreak havoc across the nation. We get this every now and again. It is winter time, of course. But seriously, it's going to rain quite heavily. So there may be some disruption on the roads. There may be some disruption on the railways. There will be, of course, disruption on the West Coast Railway, because on Sunday, like every other Sunday through until May of this year, the trains are on strike. That's right. The Avanti train line is not going to be running properly from now until May on a Sunday because apparently the people from not the Train Drivers Union ASLEF but for the RMT say that they don't fancy working on their days off. They don't really fancy working on Sundays. It's not really enough money, so they just won't bother turning up. Marvellous, isn't it? Fantastic. Meanwhile, we've got lots going on this morning. Alex Rudy-Cabana, Axel Rudy-Cabana, I should say, the Southport killer, is going to be sentenced this morning, probably as a juvenile, so he won't get a full life term, but we can only hope that he gets the most serious sentence that any judge can hand out to him. That happens around about 11 o'clock, so you hear about it on Julie Hartley-Brewer's show. We've been hearing an awful lot this morning about that case. We've been hearing an awful lot about the way Keir Starmer has handled it. Let's get a voice note from Chris.
Mike, it's Chris. Great show as always. Thanks for talking common sense for all of us. I've got to say, I think this country's going to hell in a handbasket. It really is. Starmer has done nothing but basically add torture and torment to this country since coming in the middle of last year. He's got no clue what he's doing. He's got no clue what the public want, and even when it's clear what the public want, he's got no inclination to actually act upon it.
I think you're absolutely right, Chris. I don't think anyone has any confidence in Keir Starmer and the way that he's really handling anything at all. Meanwhile, Rachel Reeves is coming back from Davos. She's been out there telling us that she's drawn a line under the chaos of the fiscal policy of the Tories. Cliff in Berkshire says Rachel from accounts has drawn a line under it, all right. She's also drawn a house with a mummy and a daddy using her crayons. Yeah, well, you could say that. I mean, it's not exactly confidence-filling, is it? She's borrowed nearly £18 billion last month alone, which is more money that's been borrowed in December since COVID. And since the last financial crash of 2009. Front page of The Sun this morning, a terrible story about a little boy called Leo Ross, a 12-year-old boy, schoolboy, walking home from school, stabbed to death by a 14-year-old just outside of his house. He just was a few feet away from his front door when that happened. The other big one this morning is in the Telegraph. 1 in 12 people in London is now an illegal migrant. That's approaching 600,000 people in London alone have come here and either have come here illegally or have come here as students and people on work visas and then have overstayed their welcome and they're still here. Bob Seeley, former Conservative MP, coming up next. I'm sure he'll have something to say about the Russian situation and subs in the channel, and of course Donald Trump and his idea that Vladimir Putin needs to end this ridiculous war. This is Morning Glory. It's time for us to get it on. Bob, a very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. Morning to your listeners and viewers.
Good to see you. Shall we start with this Rudy-Cabana case? I mean, he's going to be sentenced at 11 o'clock this morning. By all accounts and all the people we've spoken to, it looks very much like he won't be sentenced as an adult. He could be if the government changed the laws, because I think in certain circumstances like this, where the crime is so heinous and he committed it literally 13 days, I think, before his 18th birthday, surely that particular rule should be changed or lifted.
I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of that, to be honest, and it might be that I think anything that distracts us from looking at the core issues here, I think, that's up for the judges. I'm more concerned about the bizarre way that the government has dealt with this, and the bizarre way that some of the mainstream media are now saying it's somehow Amazon's fault. Right. When, as if knives are impossible to get hold of in our society, and if he hadn't been able to buy it for another 2 weeks on Amazon when he was 17, going on 18, somehow this wouldn't have happened. Yeah. I despair at that sort of reporting, to be honest. Yeah.
Well, I mean, to be fair, that was a bit of Downing Street spin, which should have been unspun before it went in a paper.
Yeah, but surely this is so awful and so serious. Why are you lowering yourself, if you're Downing Street, to be spinning something when there are such profound issues dealing with this? And I just think one of the odd ways, and there's so much odd about this case I don't like, when that Starmer said, "Oh, this is a new form of terrorism." I'm sorry, I don't understand the evidence of why he says that. It patently isn't.
Right. And also, all of this time that he spent trying to explain the definition of terrorism. I mean, you know, you and I have been around plenty in all sorts of different situations. I think we all know what a terrorist attack is. I think we all know what terrorist motivation is. And he almost, it seems to me, has artificially constructed a sort of a cage from which he can seemingly protect himself from criticism by sort of trying to hide behind the definition of a word. I don't think it makes any sense, and the British people are not going to swallow it.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, we know what terrorism looks like, and we know what lone terror. He said this is a brand new form of terrorism.
Yeah.
Online self-radicalization has been happening for 15, 20 years.
Right.
And it might be that, you know, there's a massive overlap with mental illness, and it might be that actually this isn't Islamic. I'm very happy to believe that if that's the case. Somebody having an AQ manual, an Al-Qaeda manual about how to kill people, he may not be trying to kill people because of a belief, however twisted in Islam. And in fact, there's some very powerful reporting in the Telegraph from a young reporter called Charlie Bentley Astor, who was looking and was arguing that actually he was looking at this sort of failed. He was looking at sort of genocides in revenge of slavery, in revenge of empire, all this sort of weird, twisted, sort of anti-colonial narrative that you get on the hard left. Now, I'm not saying that's the reason, but he had manuals and equipment, he had manuals and books on those themes. Right. So whether this is just failed assimilation, whether it's Islamic, whether it's just somebody who was very mentally unbalanced or just very evil, who wanted to do things. But the way to deal with this is not the way that the government has been doing it.
No,
frankly.
and it's certainly not the way to deal with it by withholding information, which would never in a million years have jeopardised any kind of court case, but was just being withheld for a reason which they have yet to explain, but which I think we all know was about, you know, so-called protecting minority communities. But the bottom line for me as well is that we're supposed to have things in place like Prevent, for example, to stop these kinds of people from carrying out these kinds of attacks, or at least to identify them. This guy gets 3 times referred to Prevent, and at no point does anybody there think he's dangerous.
And the worst, Lord Shaw, great point. Again, Lord Shawcross did a really good report about this just 2 or 3 years ago now, when he specifically said we were the rules around, or the view of hard right terrorism was too broad, which is why you have this ridiculous situation where a Jacob Rees-Mogg tweet is investigated by Prevent when around Islamic is too thin, is too narrow. Now, again, we don't know if Islamic is behind this, Islamist terrorism is behind this, we don't know. But there is an imbalance where people are desperately trying to say, well, there's a bit of a balance of terror because you've got left-wing terror and right-wing terror. I just think, again, that is not in balance. That is not defending the people of this country.
No, exactly right. And I mean, this inquiry that's going to happen, I don't know what the terms of it are supposed to be. I don't know what they're hoping to achieve. I suspect they won't be deciding that they committed a cover-up in their own inquiry, are they?
No, and it'd be interesting to listen to your viewers and listeners to see what they make of it, because by the sounds of things, I think most people won't have faith in it, which is incredibly sad, because people should be having faith in it. The state does keep letting people down, and our political classes do keep letting people down. And, you know, the Conservatives should be holding their hands up as well, because, you know, you're looking at this story today, 1 in 12 illegal immigrants in London. I mean, what's worse, the numbers or the fact that they are so difficult to find because the state makes it so difficult to find out what is happening, because it seems to be desperate to avoid any criticism of a multicultural agenda. Whereas, you know, Kemi says, our country is a home. It is not, you know, it is not a hotel for people. Come and claim stuff.
And of course, many of the people who are here illegally didn't necessarily come here on a small boat. They came here on a student visa and simply didn't bother going back. And we saw that happening with that terrible attack in Nottingham the other year. He was a student who had come to this country, who overstayed his welcome and then murdered a load of people. And I think we also have to take account, and I was just talking to a correspondent in Germany there, they had an attack yesterday, an Afghan man has been arrested, and they've got a series of those things happening all the time. Christmas markets being attacked, all the rest of it. You know, I think it's time we got a grown-up conversation going about how some of the people coming from technically war zones and places of great violence where they've witnessed things or they may even have taken part in things, you know, these are damaged individuals who may not be capable of living a normal life in Western Europe. And so, you know, I know that people will say that's a very small number of a big number, well, that may be true, but it's a bit of a coincidence, is it not, that so many of these atrocities are carried out by people who have come from what you might describe as very violent backgrounds.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Again, there is academic evidence, because I've been reading it, to show that if you come from a war zone or if you come from a refugee camp, you are more likely to end up being violent or doing violence yourself. Now, that isn't very sound on one level, because we should be helping people in refugee camps, we know, and we should be doing the right thing. But the problem is, because you have this idiot left agenda, which Conservatives have not done enough to challenge, you have this left agenda that says anyone who comes into this country who's got brown skin is a victim. If you're non-white, you're a victim. If you're a refugee, you're a victim. If you're an illegal immigrant, you're a victim. If you're a migrant, you're a victim. Everyone seems to be a victim of the West. Everyone is a victim of Western history. The problem is, if you then have people coming into this country who are unstable, who do come from refugee zones, where we know people are more likely to be radicalised, people are more likely to have a poor correlation between mental health and violence. By doing this, we're just not looking after our own people, and we're hiding behind sort of political, what most of your listeners and viewers would call political correctness. You can call it woke, you can call it critical theory. The idea that to be white is racist, to question that is racist, you know, the white society is racist, our history is racist, and anyone who challenges that is racist. This is a crazy world that we need to challenge, and the problem is that too many people in the Labour Party, in the Lib Dems, in the BBC, in some of the left-wing media, they just imbibe this and they believe it either explicitly or implicitly, and it is doing real damage to our society now.
It totally is. I mean, we speak to, on a regular basis, a guy called Alan Duncan, who's a documentary filmmaker who was just recently out in Syria looking for Shamima Begum, found her. She didn't want to talk to him, funnily enough, but he said the camps there are absolutely riddled with ISIS players. You know, ISIS hasn't gone anywhere. They're still there in massive numbers.
And you get those people, and somebody in that camp is going to be given 5 or 10 grand to get across the border, to get into Kent, to get into Dover, and set them up with a phone, or 99% of the time they will go to some kind of cell. That is organised terror. That is not self-radicalised. That is not just very damaged people getting here. And again, you know, as the point keeps being made by your listeners and viewers, we don't know who is coming into this country. And just to say to somebody, but we'll process you just because you come here illegally, is just crazy, because it is bad for our country. And if you come here illegally, you break the law, and I'm sorry, you should be going back. And again, on asylum, there are no limits, there's no caps. And what we should be doing, and one of the things I was trying to suggest to the Conservatives before the last election, you have a cap on asylum. You take 10 or 20,000 people a year who you think you can deal with, who you think you can, you know, integrate into this country, but you don't take just some bloke who's been given 5-10 grand by ISIS or a criminal gang in Syria or Libya. You take people that have gone through the UN. I think, like you, Mike, the UN's a pretty failed organisation. But if you're going to take asylum seekers, let's actually take genuine ones that have come via the United Nations, not just some bloke with a weird attitude to women who rocks up in Dover because he's paid organised crime.
Yeah, absolutely right. Let's talk a little bit about Russia before I let you go. Here's John Healey yesterday in Parliament, Defence Secretary.
A foreign vessel, Yantar, is currently in the North Sea, having passed through British waters. Let me be clear. This is a Russian spy ship used for gathering intelligence and mapping the UK's critical underwater infrastructure. For the last 2 days, the Royal Navy has deployed HMS Somerset and HMS Tyne to monitor the vessel every minute through our waters. And I changed the Royal Navy's rules of engagement so that our warships can get closer and better track the Yantar. And I also want President Putin to hear this message. We see you, we know what you're doing, and we will not shy away from robust action to protect this country.
I think we finally found a Labour cabinet member, Bob, who knows what he's doing.
Yeah, and look, I don't want to be party political about this. So John Healey is potentially a good defence secretary.
He is.
I like him. I think he's very sensible. I think he's an old school right-wing Labour.
Yeah.
So he's on the right of the Labour Party, and he's a patriot. He knows the damage that the hard left do. And to give him his credit, he potentially is not going to be a bad Secretary of State. He'll be a good Secretary of State. His problem is he's not getting any money.
Yeah.
The Tories belatedly got serious about defence because we need to increase defence spending, but he hasn't got the backing. Apparently, he doesn't get on with Claire Rayner, or Claire Rayner doesn't like him.
Angela Rayner.
Sorry, and I do apologise.
He might not get on with Claire Rayner either, but
but he's not getting the money. But he's potentially good. The problem is just the wider problem with the Russians now. I don't think we're going to see negotiations bring the war to an end. The Russians want to destroy the Zelensky regime. They want to destroy Ukraine. They don't want peace with Ukraine. If they wanted peace with Ukraine, they wouldn't have invaded it. They want to destroy Ukraine, and they fight NATO in Ukraine. So that's what they're doing. Globally, they're upping their information war. We saw that with the Russians indirectly paying members of the alt-right big media community in the United States. We see that with the influence they have in European politicians, and we see that increasingly, as the head of MI5 said, in the sabotage operations that the Russians are now doing in Europe. And these are physical sabotage. So they're mapping our cables either to destroy them anyway, because we are in sub-war conflict with the Russians for the next 20 years, or as part of a shaping operation if things kick off, if they decide to attack the Baltic republics, which is going to be their way of breaking Western power and breaking NATO. And I wish collectively we were more serious about this, because there's a reasonable chance of conflict with the Russians, including us directly, in the next few years, and we've got to get wise to it, and we're still not serious about our defence.
And what do you make of Trump's intervention overnight? He's basically said to Putin, end this ridiculous war now, we can do it the easy way or the hard way. He's threatening sanctions. I mean, he's doing what he said he would do, which is to try and solve the problem.
Yeah, I mean, good for Trump. I'm not his biggest fan, but I think I love what he's doing on woke. I love what he's doing about actually having leadership and getting stuff done. And I think many of your listeners and viewers would agree with the stuff that he's getting done, especially on woke, especially on getting rid of diversity jobs and all this other stuff. And he's giving the Russians a blunt threat. He's saying either talk peace or we'll up the arms to the Ukrainians. And I think that is a very sensible attitude. And the reality is that even if Putin does talk peace, he won't want peace. And even if there are negotiations leading to a temporary settlement, Putin will simply wind in the military forms of conflict, and he will go and up the ante for other forms of conflict, so bribery, corruption, espionage, assassination. He wants Ukraine under his thumb, and the Ukrainians don't want to be under his thumb. That's the basic problem. And however much the West wants negotiation, if Putin wants to destroy Ukraine and the Ukrainians are determined to defend themselves, that is a rock and a hard place, and it's very difficult to see a way around that.
Yeah, it really is. Bob, good to talk to you. Good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Bob Seeley, former Conservative MP there, making a lot of sense about a great many things. Looks like we've got some information coming in now from Plymouth. Police have launched a murder investigation following the death of a woman in Plymouth. Officers were called at 8:55 last night, Wednesday, after a woman in her 40s was found seriously injured in a street in the area known as West Hoe. The woman was taken to hospital but was pronounced dead in the early hours. The large number of police units remain on the scene. It says the victim and the suspect are believed to be known to one another, which is a fairly key part of this. And they say, we are looking to locate a man in relation to this incident whose identity is known. Inquiries are ongoing to find him. The police say there is no suggestion that there is any wider risk to members of the public. So that would seem to be a horrible case of some kind of a relationship gone wrong, something like that. The two people known to one another, but that explains what was going on last night in Plymouth, for those of you who were asking. We'll keep you updated on that, of course, as we get more information. Coming up next, though, Dale Vince is here. We're going to be talking about veganism, net zero, and all manner of other things as well. Let's just talk.
do what Trump is doing, people will get on a plane, take their capital with them, and go to the US. We have no option but to get on that, get with the program, or lose our economy and lose our best people. But I just want to pick up on one thing where you started. I mean, it was absolutely a goosebump moment listening to what President Trump was saying, and indeed listening to his team around him and the various comments they've been making over the last few days.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's 9:25. I'm Mike Graham with you for just about another half an hour or so. Julie Hartley-Brewer will be here as well. We're going to be talking to Stephen Barrett coming up, barrister about Southport and the sentencing of Axel Rudy-Cabana around about 11 o'clock this morning. Dale Vince is here. We're going to be talking to him, the founder of Ecotricity. Let's get a quick voice note, though, from John.
Morning, Mike. Great show as always. Never miss. John from Chesterfield. Just been in B&Q, Mike, to get some of that new Starmer paint. Amazing. Covers up everything. Have a nice day.
Is it transparent paint? Obviously not. Let's talk to Dale Vince, though, founder of Ecotricity, a man who is always in the news for one reason or another. Dale, very good morning to you.
Yeah, morning, Mike. How you doing?
Yeah, not bad at all. A couple of things for you this morning. Sir Keir Starmer will make it more difficult for the public to block major infrastructure projects such as wind farms and nuclear plants in the courts. We've got Rachel Reeves going to war with Ed Miliband in the cabinet over net zero. She says net zero is not as important as growth. I know you're not a great big fan of Ed Miliband and some of the stuff he wants to do. So where's it all going wrong for them for net zero? Net zero doesn't seem to be getting any closer. It's getting further away, isn't it?
Well, I don't think that's right. I'd say I am a fan of Ed Miliband, by the way. Just some of the things he's doing, I'm not a fan of, like, supporting nuclear power and that kind of stuff. I think we're racing ahead when it comes to green energy. But there's this conflict, potentially anyway. That's what we read in the news, conflict between things like new runways and wind farms. And, I don't think we need new runways.
Well, if you want to grow the economy, you need to grow the economy by somehow creating a happy environment for people to invest in Britain. And at the moment, nobody wants to invest in Britain because it's too expensive.
I don't know where you read that. Like, more runways aren't going to make Britain a happier place for people to invest in. Listen, 15% of us might take 70% of flights. This is not a mass transport thing.
Yeah,
flying.
but you know about flying, though, don't you, Dale? It's not just about people going on holiday. It's not just about people like you flying around in private jets. It's about people actually moving goods. Part of Heathrow's massive trade business is in goods coming. It's cargo. It's not just the things that we eat, the things that we buy, the things that are flown into the country. It's not just people on jollies. Have you frozen? Don't tell me you're frozen. He hasn't paid the electricity bill, has he? Ecotricity. You can't rely on it. He's probably got green energy down there. That's the problem, isn't it? Absolutely ridiculous. How about this? Mike says, oh, is he back? I was going to say, did you need to put a penny in the old electricity meter down there? You got the windmill going.
This happens every time I'm on with you. I'm sure it's your end.
It's nothing to do with us. No, we've got proper powered electricity up here. No, but seriously, I mean, you do realise that the economy is not in a good place, right? I mean, you're a businessman. You should know that. They're putting taxes up. You're going to be paying more national insurance. That's not going to generate growth for you, is it?
Well, look, we're 6 months into a new Labour government, and all of the problems that we're facing have been inherited after a 15-year Conservative tenure. So I think we can't expect it to have been turned around relatively overnight.
No,
I don't
hang
think
on.
the economy is in a bad way, actually. I think, things are looking rather good.
Well, you're the only person who thinks that. National insurance kicks in April, right? So they haven't inherited that from the Tories. They're putting more and more cost onto businesses in this country. The guy that runs Brewdog, I had him on the show yesterday, Scottish guy, brilliant entrepreneur like yourself. He says this is the worst possible time to start a business in the UK, and he's never been more concerned about the future of our economy.
No, I think that's untrue. I've started businesses deep in recessions. I think that's a harder time to start things. And look, of course, national insurance has gone up. It was part of tax raising to fill the 22 billion black hole that the Tories left behind. I mean, Labour are dealing with 15 years of mismanagement of the economy.
They say
it's going to take a little while.
Yeah, but last month they borrowed nearly £18 billion. Now they say they've got a £22 billion black hole. What are they doing with the 18 billion? That means we've now got a nearly £40 billion black hole. So they've made it almost twice as bad.
But, remember, Labour picked up the reins of 15 years of Tory leadership of our country, and these debts and these problems they're inherited.
Well, what are they doing? All right. Well, so what are they doing with the 18 billion?
I couldn't tell you.
Well, I mean, it's a lot of money. It's the most It's the most any government has ever borrowed in December in 1 month since COVID, and then before that, the last time was in 2009 when we had a financial crash. Things are not going well.
Yeah, but Labour didn't start with a clean slate 6 months ago. You've got to remember that.
Yeah, well, I do remember that. It doesn't matter, though. That's a bit like saying, so I bought this house, right, and it had a hole in the floor. So what I did was I kept digging into the hole in the floor to make it bigger and bigger and bigger until I eventually fell in it. That's the same thing. What you're supposed to do is you get in and you fill the floor in. You don't let the hole get bigger, do you?
It's not the same thing.
All right. Now, listen, you issued a challenge to me a little while ago. I'm going to play this for you because not everybody saw it, because I think you've been shadow banned on X because of your extreme views. But have a look at this.
How you doing, Mikey?
Dale, very good morning to you.
I hope 2025 has been good to you so far. You probably noticed, I reckon, that this is Veganuary. And I also reckon it's not your favourite month of the year.
But vegan foods, I just can't do it. It's horrible.
But look, we're halfway through, and I got a suggestion for you. Join the party. Join us for the second half of Veganuary. Go plant-based. See what you think.
It really is. It's disgusting. It's actually revolting.
I'll donate a bunch of money to a charity of your choice if you'll do that. So you come back to me, tell me what it's going to cost for you, Mike Graham, to go plant-based for the rest of January. What do you say?
Dale Vince, thank you very much indeed. Yeah, I'm afraid I had to politely decline that on the grounds that, my doctors have advised me against it, because I can't do without the protein. I'd have to eat my weight in beans or something, wouldn't I, in order to continue to get the protein that I normally get from my meat diet.
That's such a big myth, actually.
It's not a myth at all.
Yeah, it is. There's more protein in plants, kilogram for kilogram, than there is in meat. I mean,
yeah, but they also taste like plants. That's why I don't eat them.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, you're destined for a very unhealthy end of life.
Not at all. I've got a series of very clean bills of health from many doctors who I see on a regular basis who say that they can't believe how fit I am, considering what my lifestyle has been over the years. But here's my challenge. Here's my challenge to you. Well, we did it once before. You sent me a load of your burgers, I think, ages ago, which I distributed.
I think you liked them.
I distributed them out to my kids. I had a bite of one of them, but I didn't fancy it. But you're never gonna convince most people to go vegan. I mean, look at the state of Darren Jones. He's the deputy at the Chancellor of the Exchequer's office, right? He looks weak. He looks thin. He looks unhappy. He's always on TV trying to defend Rachel Reeves, and I just think, and he's the guy that's trying to shut down all the farms in this country because he's a vegan. He is.
You say some funny things, but I mean, blimey, he's trying to shut down all the farms in the country. Where'd you get that from?
Well, have you not seen the effects of the inheritance tax they're trying to start up in April?
Well, I've seen that it's created a lot of whinging, but all it's really is closing of a loophole, a tax loophole, whereby farmers didn't pay inheritance tax like the rest of us do.
Yeah, but it's closing down a lot of farms. A lot of farms are going to shut as a result of it.
Nah, they're not.
Even Rachel Reeves has conceded that it's going to shut some farms down. There's just an argument about how many. I don't know why they want to do that.
farming is already a marginal business, particularly meat and dairy farming. And so, you know, if it's the last straw for a couple of people and they say, "Oh, sorry, I'm getting out of here," I mean, who knows? But they still won't avoid inheritance tax even if they quit farming. So I don't understand how.
But the farming is a special case. I'm not getting into it here because it's too complicated. But at the end of the day, you know, the farming business is not something that is worth as much as the land that it's made on, if you know what I mean. So to charge people an inheritance tax because of the value of the land itself, and listen, I'm with you. If somebody's bought a farm in order to avoid paying tax, that's different. But if somebody's got a working farm, let them do their work, let them produce the food, and let them hand that over to their kids. I don't see what's wrong with that.
Yeah, I hear that argument, but I think it's the same for millions of people with the family home. They want to leave it to their family without tax.
Why shouldn't
they can't make money with the home. The value of the home is much higher than the money they could make with the home, but still they pay inheritance tax. I don't think farmers should be a special case.
Yeah, I mean, I think that once you've paid tax once, that should be enough, shouldn't it? Why should you have to pay it again?
We pay it loads of times, don't we? We pay income tax and national insurance, then we pay VAT when we spend our money, and then we pay inheritance tax when we die.
Yeah. Now, I've got a question for you here. This is on a sort of slightly happier note. It says here, it might come as a surprise to some couples, but the secret to a satisfying life could be getting married. Now, I don't want to impinge on any personal grief here, but you've just paid out an awful lot of money to get rid of one of your wives. 40.5 million quid you gave her. And you say that actually you're happy with that because you would have offered her more money and she should have taken more money earlier.
Well, actually, couple of things just to correct that. I did offer her more money 4 years ago. I offered 50 million quid. They wanted 100. The judge did order 41.8, I think it was, but got a legal bill of £4 million. So it's a walk away, 38 million compared to 50 offered 4 years ago. I'm happy because it's a vindication of everything I did in the case. I haven't paid her the money because I don't have the money, by the way.
Yeah, you haven't paid her yet?
No. It'll be paid over the next few years. Judge gave me installments, so that's
really?
You know.
How many?
So, say what?
How many installments?
Oh, it's 3 installments paid 3 times, the coming April and then the next 2 Aprils.
Blimey.
So I'm going to have to sell something to pay the bill, but that's fine.
What are you going to sell? You sell that electric bike you've got.
No, that won't do it. That won't do it.
I mean, how much money have you actually got? I mean, I've never seen anybody looking so happy at parting with 40 million quid.
Well, look, you know, we were married for 20 years, so, I mean, she's entitled to, you know, half of the money that we made or the value that we created in that period. And the argument really was that I'd spent 10 years before that building the companies myself, and that should be taken into account. The judge agreed with me, and rather than 50% of everything, it was 50% of the marital period, and overall I think it came out to like 38% of everything, and I was happy with that because it was fair, and fairness is an important thing.
Are you going to get married again? Because it says here that people who are married and in committed relationships have higher life satisfaction on average than those who are single.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where you're reading that, but I'm not single.
It's a study that's been done in all sorts of 57,000 people in more than 65 countries across the world, including the UK, US, France, Italy, Japan, and Thailand. Well, it might be slightly different in Thailand, I suppose, but yeah. So it's a big study that's been done.
Nice, but I mean, you don't have to be married to be in a relationship and be happy and having fun.
That's true. And. So you're going to get married again then?
Oh, I have no idea. Listen, I've done it twice in my life, and in both times I've done it, I did it because my partner at the time believed in it and wanted it. I never have done, but I did it anyway. So
how much did
the
first wife get?
Well, I had nothing. We had nothing, and
she must be pretty annoyed.
Maybe we were only together 18 months.
She gets nothing. The second one gets 40 million.
Well, what are you going to do? We lived together for 20 years, and during that time, electricity grew to be quite valuable, and it was all about what was it worth. And so, you know, I've got no complaints, except that it shouldn't have taken 4 years. It shouldn't have had all that grief in my life and all the legal expenses. I mean, she spent £4 million on lawyers.
I know, it's mad, isn't it?
To achieve less than I offered her 4 years ago, and you know, that makes me say that the law should be changed, actually, that it should be easier to get to a number. This was just a numbers case, and no fault divorce. It was just about what's a fair number, and there must be a way to do that without spending millions of pounds and years of your life.
Yeah. No, yeah, you're right. I mean, I've been divorced. I got a friend of mine who got divorced. He went to see his lawyer, and he said, well, I've got 2 choices. I can either give all my money to the ex-wife or I can give it all to him. You know, I mean, that's unfortunately where we are, isn't it? And you can't do it without a lawyer.
It's a little bit like that. But, you know, there are some bad lawyers in this country, and my ex-wife's team, they rank amongst them. You know, they ran a hideously hopeless case, made millions of pounds from her, and then lost spectacularly in front of the judge. And we knew they would because they didn't have the law on their side. But they have no comeback for that, and they should have.
Yeah. I'll leave you with one final question about Donald Trump. I mean, he's basically going at everything at 100 miles an hour. One of the things he's done is he's left the Paris Accord again, and he's going to be basically dumping all over net zero. Drill, baby, drill is his mantra. How much of a knock-on effect do you think that's going to have on Europe?
I don't think it'll have a big effect. As you say, he's left Paris once before. That achieved, I would say, nothing in a negative sense. But here's a little fact for you, Mike, that's interesting. He is big on the rhetoric of drill, baby, drill. But in his first period in office, he issued less drilling licenses than Joe Biden did in the most recent period. 300 a year to Trump in his period, about 460 to Biden in his period. So, you know, this is interesting to look at. I don't think he'll follow through.
Well, the thing is with Biden, he was probably told that he wasn't doing any of that, and he didn't really know that they were doing it behind his back. I don't think you should be sure what was going on for 4 years, but there we are. When are you coming back to London?
Oh, I'm there every other week or so.
Are you? Well, you should pop in and see us.
All right, I will.
I know it's a bit early, I know for you, but you hippies, and you don't get up too early. But if you can get up here, you know, before 9, that'd be great.
Before 9, blimey. I don't eat donuts, by the way. Don't lay on donuts.
No, we don't have donuts anymore. We've got cutbacks here. We've got no food at all. Can't afford it, I'm afraid. But
I'll send you some burgers then.
I'll see what I can do. Yeah, good to talk to you, Dale. Thank you very much indeed. Dale Vince there from Ecotricity. Loses 40 million quid. He's still smiling. Amazing. There's money in them there hills if you're into the net zero business. He runs Ecotricity. We ran out of electricity while we were talking to him. We can only assume that that's because of his ridiculous green energy scenario. But anyway, there we are. Coming up, we're going to talk to Stephen Barrister about what's coming up later on this morning, which is, of course, the sentencing of the Southport killer. There's a talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 9:42. It is that time, isn't it, where you go, how did the time go? The show's nearly over, but don't worry, we've still got about 15 minutes to go. Graham says this: I hope Dale Vince's wife celebrated their divorce with a big fat steak. Nick in Woking: I'm in the process of a divorce, never again. And Stuart says, regarding veganism, plants are the food of my food, and I don't intend to change that relationship anytime soon. Yeah, I see what you mean. Lots of you, of course, have had many, many things to say this morning. I apologise if I haven't got to absolutely all of your messages. A lot of them have been about the culture of knife crime. A lot of them have been about the Russian ship as well. And, of course, the 1 in 12 people in London being illegal migrants. But also, an awful lot of you have things to say as well about what's coming up this morning, and that is the sentencing of the Southport killer, Axel Radikabanu, who is going to be hopefully sent to jail for a very, very long time. However, he may well be treated as a juvenile because he committed his crimes, the heinous murders of those 3 beautiful little girls, Alice 9, Elsie 7 and BB 6, in a rampage that lasted for 12 minutes of sheer horror. You can only imagine what those poor children went through. Members of the relatives of his victims have said that they would like to see him rotting in jail. Life must mean life. But will it? Stephen Barrett's here, barrister of some renown. Stephen, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
So, I mean, I depressingly see that despite the fact that it doesn't seem right in the natural order of things, that this character, monster, whatever you want to call him, evil individual, will probably be sentenced as a juvenile. What are the sort of the comparisons with what would happen if he was not under the age of 18 when he committed these crimes, and what are the kind of the guidelines for all this?
Well, first of all, Mike, I think you're right to use the word evil. And I think we have to accept that word. I think we have to treat it as a grown-up word, not a childish word.
Yeah.
And I think we have to recognise that what happened was absolutely evil. Now, because of the way that our laws are ordered, if he'd done this 10 days after he did it, or 11 days after he did it, or if he'd been born 11 days earlier in life, he'd now be facing what's called a whole life tariff. Given I'm very well aware of the details, they are absolutely horrific. They're going to come out today. People are going to cry because what he did was just it's not conceivable to most normal people. I can't really understand how anybody could do that to a 6-year-old girl. I don't. And there were 10 others that he stabbed. We should say, Mike, just to be very clear, I think it's worth mentioning that the country should recognise hope and heroism, and Leanne Lucas and John Hayes, 2 adults who were also stabbed quite horrifically, tried to defend children.
Yeah.
So those are what we call heroes. So we are back to basics, Mike. We have evil and we have heroes, and we should praise those heroes, Leanne and John, as we go through this together. Because of the technicality of our rules, he's not going to be sentenced as an adult. He's not going to face a whole life tariff. What he instead will face is a life sentence, which is entirely correct. I mean, we can change all this, Mike.
Yeah.
So let's think about that. As a nation together, I'm not going to sit here as a lawyer and tell everybody what we should do and how we should punish people. To be perfectly honest, if it were up to me, I'd probably accidentally lose the key to his prison cell.
Yeah.
But, you know, we can have a system that we all agree on and that we like and that we think works.
Yes. I mean, I know that politicians are always squeamish about supposedly interfering, but I mean, from what I've seen of this Keir Starmer government, I believe that they've already been interfering in the judicial system, and I suspect that you do as well. And whether they do it officially or unofficially is not really the point. But surely there must be room for a Prime Minister or a Home Secretary or somebody to be able to say to a judge in a case like this crime is so heinous and so awful, and because it has been committed so close to his 18th birthday, on this occasion I will permit you to sentence this individual as an adult because he now is.
It's open to Parliament to do that, yes. And a Prime Minister who controls Parliament could have done that. He hasn't done that.
No.
But that could have been done.
I think people will be dismayed at the very least, and possibly angry that he hasn't done that.
Well, I think that's perfectly legitimate if they are. He's had lots of time to prepare for today. Let's make sure there's no criticism of Mr. Justice Goose, the judge. He's just going to have to use the system that the Prime Minister has allowed to continue to exist. You know, that's and so the judge really is, and bless him, he will know more details than any of us. So he will have seen things that, I mean, even I don't want to know about.
Yes. So will we learn more then at the sentencing hearing, and we will be able to read about that in the papers in the morning, presumably?
Yes, I think so, and I think there'll be pictures. I've seen pictures, and they're very traumatic. This was evil. There's just no other way I can describe it. But just to get back to the detail, Mike, the starting point for the life, so he'll get a life sentence, and then there's what's called a minimum term. And the starting point for that will be 27 years. Right. Now, his crime is so horrific that I think it must be more than 27 for the minimum term. I can't believe the judge. We'll see what the judge does, but I personally would guess the judge will go higher than 27. Right. There's a technicality. He pleaded guilty on the day of trial. And if you plead guilty, well, really early, you can get a 30% discount on your sentence. If you plead guilty on the day of trial, you can get a 10% discount on your sentence. I think, to be absolutely honest, Mike, he did this in a horrific way. I think the families were already traumatized, and I would invite, or I hope, the judge will not give him any discount for pleading guilty.
Yes, because again, I think that would be wrong. Totally wrong.
Well, it was basically at the last possible second, and he hadn't put in a defence.
Right.
In many ways, he was playing us for fools. He pled not guilty, and we are a beautiful and lovely country, so we treat people as innocent until they've pleaded guilty because we are noble. And he basically played against that. He took us for fools on that, and because he was always guilty. We all knew he was guilty, but you know that was a ridiculous thing. So I seriously hope the judge doesn't give a 10% discount, but his counsel will no doubt, his barrister will do the best for him he can, because that's what barristers do. And his barrister will no doubt ask for it, and we'll just have to see what the judge does. Given
so, are you saying the maximum he can get is 27 years?
No, that's the starting point.
Okay.
I think there is no technical maximum, but anything the judge... So again, I'd probably sit there. This is one good reason why I probably shouldn't be a judge, but I'd probably give him a minimum of 80 years or something, just to see what the Court of Appeal did. Yeah. But I think this is a very serious judge, and this judge, I think, in my view, just to give your viewers and listeners a figure, adding it all up, dotting all the I's, crossing the T's, I think it's going to be around 34 years as a minimum term.
Okay. And that would allow him to apply for parole at what point?
After those 34 years.
Oh, so not after 2/3 of those 34 years?
No, it's better than that.
Yeah.
One of the problems I think your viewers and listeners need to discuss, one of the problems I think the nation needs to discuss, I've raised it before and I'll probably raise it again, is that then goes to this thing called the parole board, who are these alleged experts who have tried to let free people who are pretty seriously dangerous and who should not have been let free.
And who have let free several people recently who have had to be recalled on account of the fact that they are still dangerous.
Yes. So what I would like to share with the nation is that the parole board is not, in my view, a trustworthy body.
No.
That you should leave this stuff to.
Exactly.
It should go to a minister, and then if the minister messes up, it used to be with the Home Secretary, this type of thing.
Yes.
And then if the Home Secretary messes up, you can sack them.
Right.
You and I can go in the media, we can call for them to be sacked. No, nobody on the parole board, as far as I'm concerned, has ever faced any justice for their own incompetence.
Well, we don't even know who they are. We're not allowed to know who they are, and that's part of the problem with the system. But, Stephen, I really appreciate your time. We haven't got a lot of it this morning, I'm afraid, but you've very eloquently explained precisely what will happen. That's Stephen Barrett, barrister, who thinks the minimum term that this guy will get will be around 34 years, and that could mean that certainly he won't be getting out before that, and I think we'd all hope that that would be the case. I mean, he should never be let out. It's as simple as that. Let's get a voice note from Tony on Dale Vince.
Hi, mate. Great show as usual. Fantastic show. Where do you get these stupid people from? Dale Vince. Who is this guy with the Hitler haircut, wanting us all to go vegan? What a load of rubbish. We need to eat meat, keep healthy, plenty of protein, and this is the guy who wants us all to go you know, net zero, which is just going to kill the economy. It's killing it already. Nobody wants to invest in this country. Look at Germany, the car market's collapsing because of this green agenda, and UK is going the same way. You've got Zero Ed pushing these stupid windmills and wind farms, and they think that's going to supply the England, you know, running on unicorns, you know, rainbows and farts. It ain't going to work. We need to get common sense back in this country.
Tony, absolutely right. We are at the headquarters of Common Sense. We started it, we kicked it off. Now we've got Reform using it as a slogan. We've got Donald Trump using it as the revolution of common sense. John says, Mike, Dale Vince, multi-millionaire, can't find a decent barber. Is Dale having a midlife crisis, says one listener. What on earth has he done with his hair? It looks awful. I know. You'd think, well, he hasn't got any money left now. He's given half of his money away to his ex-wife, 40 million. Still smiling. Unbelievable. It's 9:53.
Government borrowing costs hit a 27-year high, and the pound is taking a pounding. Gloomy economic data is expected to show inflation and growth are off course.
Let me ask again, and can you please be clear, will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this pond?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence, and she has the full confidence of the entire party.
Can Rachel Reeves hold on as Chancellor?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And welcome back to Morning Glory, 9:57. I'm Mike Graham, of course. We've got a voice note from Rich on veganism. How you go?
Hi, Mike. I was a vegan. I had no libido. I had terrible skin. I had IBS. I couldn't sleep very well. I was miserable. Yeah. Well, I've been eating meat for the last 6 months. I'm healthy. I've got a very good libido. I sleep well. My skin's fantastic. Let me tell you, all them vegans you see, when you see them like demonstrating. They're not miserable because of the animals, they're miserable because the food makes you miserable. I'm telling you, it's terrible.
Well, that's what I say, and that's why I'm never going to do it. It tastes like cardboard. If I want to eat cardboard, I just eat cardboard. It'd be cheaper than eating some kind of processed nonsense. Julie Hartley-Brewis here.
Very
Good
good
morning
one.
to you.
Yeah, I have never got it. I've never met someone who's a healthy vegan. I mean, pescatarianism, I could almost
That's all right,
see, but
yeah.
I love a good juicy steak
Yeah.
or a burger. Oh,
But you don't want it all the time.
We've got these teeth for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely right. And the thing about food is that, you know, sometimes, you know, I was told at one point, you know, you shouldn't quite really eat so much cheese. So try not to eat so much cheese, right? So I went, fine. So now I make macaroni and cheese like once a month, and it's fantastic because you look forward to it.
I just think a lot of these people, I just think it's like sort of the people who are sort of like, you know, don't drink, don't eat this, don't eat that. I think they're just unhappy people. I think they just don't enjoy it. I've never met anybody who has any of those faddy things who enjoys life.
Because they're not saving anything. They're not saving the planet. I mean, have you seen that latest fire in California? There's another fire has started up.
By the way, nothing to do with climate change.
The size of the cloud, literally, would probably dwarf Europe.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
And how much CO2 is in there?
Those idiot Egypts, the vegans who are blocking the aisles and the supermarkets. I mean, as I said, the guys with the trolleys, I'd have taken a run up.
I would have done.
I would have gone, because you could. Also, I might have gone and bought some bacon and just opened it and just sat there and just sort of played with it on the front of the...
Put it on their back